Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story asks, what if Harry Potter claimed the Slytherin legacy and remade the wizarding world in his image? Before we dive in, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. All right, let's begin. Chapter 1, the serpent uncoiled the window of the smallest bedroom at number 4 faced east, and Harry Potter had learned to hate the sunrise for the way it arrived without permission. He sat with his back to the wall and his knees drawn up, and he watched the light climb the roof of the house opposite until it caught the weather vane and turned it to a thin line of fire. Somewhere below, Vernon Dursley's alarm clock produced its single strangled note and was silenced. The house began its small machinery of pretending everyone in it was ordinary, water in the pipes, a drawer sliding shut, Dudley's feet on the stairs heavy as a dropped sack. Harry did not move. He had been awake for most of the night, and the part of the night he had not spent awake he had spent inside a corridor with a black curtain hanging in an archway and a voice that used to laugh going quiet behind it. He no longer bothered trying to steer the dreams. They went where they wanted. Sirius went through the veil again, unhurried, faintly surprised, and the stone did not give him back. The ministry had spent a year explaining to the country that Harry Potter was a liar. He had counted the mornings. There had been the prophet with its little poison paragraphs, the whispers in corridors, the toad in pink who had cut words into the back of his hand and called it discipline. He had absorbed all of it the way a wall absorbs rain, which is to say it soaked him through and told no one. He had been 15 and furious and largely alone, and he had done what he was told because the people telling him wore the faces of the only family he had left. Now he was almost 16 and something in him had stopped raining. He had noticed it a week ago in the garden weeding Aunt Petunia's borders under a sky like wet slate. A worm had come up on the trowel, cut clean in two, and both halves had gone on writhing, each convinced it was still the whole animal. He had knelt there and watched them and felt nothing move in him at all, not pity, not disgust. A flat, clean attention, like the first cold morning of a season you have been waiting for without knowing it. That was when he had begun to listen to the other voice. It was not a possession. He had been possessed, and this was not that. This was quieter, and it was his. It had been speaking to him for years, and he had spent those years shouting over it. The Sorting Hat had heard it first, 5 summers gone, and had murmured into his skull that he would do well in Slytherin, that greatness waited for him there, and he had begged the ancient thing not to put him where the frightened part of him did not want to go. He had chosen the House of the Brave because a pale boy in a shop had been rude to him, because a red-haired boy on a train had said Slytherin turned out bad men, because he had wanted more than air to be liked. He had spent 5 years being liked when they remembered to like him and being hated when it was convenient and being used the entire time by everyone who claimed to protect him. He turned the trowel in his hands now in memory and understood something the 15-year-old had not been ready to understand. The hat had not been threatening him, it had been offering him a door. Below, Aunt Petunia's voice climbed the stairs. The garden won't do itself, Harry stood. He looked at himself in the black glass of the window before the sun finished burning it clear. The face that looked back had lost the last of its roundness over the year. There were bones in it now that had been waiting under the child, and the eyes his mother had given him looked out of that new architecture without any of the pleading he was used to seeing there. No, he said to the glass, so quietly that the word barely disturbed the air. It won't. He was not talking about the garden. Downstairs he ate 2 pieces of toast standing at the counter, because Vernon would not have him at the table when there was a chance a neighbor might glance in. Dudley watched him over a bowl of the diet cereal his mother still forced on him and found nothing to say. The great blonde bulk of his cousin had learned sometime in the past year that Harry no longer flinched. It made Dudley uneasy in a way he could not name and did not like, and so he ate his cereal and looked at the table and let Harry be. Vernon lowered his newspaper a careful inch. You'll stay in the house today, there's a garden party at the Palkases, we can't have you out where people can see. All right, Harry said. The mildness of it made Vernon suspicious, which was correct of him. Vernon studied his nephew over the crumpled financial pages, waiting for the flare, the muttered thing, the excuse to shout. It did not come. Harry finished his toast, rinsed his plate, set it in the rack, and went back up the stairs without a word, and Vernon Dursley sat holding his newspaper and feeling, without any way to explain it to himself, that a thermostat had been turned down somewhere in his house and the cold was coming from his nephew's room. Harry closed his door. He sat on the bed. Hedwig turned her head to watch him from the top of the wardrobe, and he watched her back, and neither of them made any noise, and the morning went on outside as if nothing in the world had shifted. By 10 the Dursleys were gone, the car reversing out with Vernon's usual overcaution, Petunia's face already arranged into its party smile. The moment the sound of the engine died into the ordinary street, Harry got up and knelt and drew the loose floorboard from beneath the bed. Under it, wrapped in a school shirt, lay the letter. It had come 3 nights ago by an owl he did not recognize, a heavy gray bird with a Gringotts seal on the leather at its leg. He had read the letter perhaps 40 times. He read it again now, though he no longer needed to. To Mr. H. J. Potter it said, in a hand that had the sharp economy of something not written by a human. You are summoned at your convenience and with all discretion to the London branch of Gringotts Bank, for the settlement of the estate of Sirius Orion Black, of whom you are named principal heir, and for a matter of your own inheritance which the bank has been prevented from bringing to your attention, and now the impediment being void brings. Ask for Nagnock of the Overledger's office. Come alone or do not come. The bank does not treat with escorts. Prevented. He had turned that word over for 3 nights like a stone with writing on the underside. The bank has been prevented from bringing to your attention. Someone had stood between him and something that was his. He did not have to think long about who. The list of people who had spent 5 years standing between Harry Potter and the truth was short and distinguished, and at the head of it always stood a very old man with half-moon spectacles who signed his letters with a twinkle and meant every manipulation as a kindness. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Getting out of Privet Drive without the order noticing was not, in the end, difficult, and the fact that it was not difficult told him something useful about the people who were meant to be guarding him. There was a watcher. There was always a watcher changing on a rota he had worked out over the summer by the simple method of paying attention, which none of them seemed to expect him to do. Today it was Mundungus Fletcher, and Mundungus Fletcher could be relied upon to abandon his post for the length of a transaction if a transaction presented itself. Harry had over the years saved a little, not much. A few galleons changed to Muggle notes kept under the same floorboard. He wrote a note in a hand not his own, offering a quantity of gently acquired cauldrons at a price no fence could resist, and he saw to it that the note reached Mundungus by the least traceable route he could arrange, and at 11 o'clock the smell of pipe smoke that had been loitering at the end of the street simply went away. He walked out of Little Winging in a jacket that did not fit and a temper that fit perfectly. Took the bus, and then he stood on a certain corner in London and put out his wand hand without any real doubt that the thing would come, and the night bus tore out of the space between 1 second and the next with a bang that rattled the shop fronts. Diagon Alley, he told the conductor and paid and did not give his name and sat at the back with his hood up while the bus flung itself across the country in lurches that would have made him sick a year ago. He watched the world blur past the windows. Villages, a motorway, a cathedral town with its spire like a raised finger. All of it going about its ordinary business, none of it aware that it was broken, that the men and women who ruled its hidden half were rotten to the beam, that the whole edifice of the wizarding world was a beautiful old house with the joists eaten through, and everyone inside pretending the floor was sound because the alternative was to admit they were standing on nothing. He had spent 5 years being asked to save that house. No one had ever asked him whether it was worth saving as it was. No one had asked because they did not want the answer. The leaky cauldron was near empty at midday. Tom the barman nodded at the hood without seeing the face which suited Harry, and he passed through into the yard and tapped the bricks and watched the wall fold itself open onto the crooked, gleaming wonder of the alley. It was quieter than he remembered. The war Dumbledore had spent a year insisting on and the ministry had spent a year denying had begun quietly to be believed. Shops that had been bright were shuttered. Posters offered advice on protective charms in a tone of forced calm. A knot of witches outside the apothecary went silent as he passed, and he did not slow and he did not care, and he found the not caring easier than it had ever been. Gringotts stood at the top of the alley the way it always had, white and crooked and vast, its bronze doors catching the gray light. The warning graven over the second set of doors had been read to him once as a threat. He read it now as a philosophy. Thieves, it said, in effect, will be given precisely what they came for. He climbed the steps and went in. The great hall was cool and high and full of the small industry of goblins at their long counters, quills scratching, scales chiming faintly under the weight of coin, the smell of old metal and older paper. Harry crossed the marble to the nearest free teller, a goblin with a face like a folded map, and waited to be looked at. "Name," said the goblin, not looking. "Harry Potter. I'm here to see Nagnock of the Overledger's office." The quill stopped. Goblin looked up, and there was a change in the set of the long features, an attention that had not been there for the ordinary custom. "You came without escort." "I came alone." The letter was specific. Something moved behind the goblin's eyes that in a human Harry would have called approval, and in a goblin he had no name for. "Wait," it said, and struck a small bell and spoke to the goblin, who answered it in the language that sounded like iron being folded, and turned back to Harry. "You will be taken up. Do not touch what you are not given. Do not speak to the ledgers and Mr. Potter." The old creature held his eyes. "You will be tested for what you are, not for what you have been told you are. Some find the difference difficult." "I've spent a year being told what I am by people who were lying," Harry said. "I'll manage the truth." The goblin showed its teeth, which was not a smile and was not a smile, and gestured him on. Nagnock's office was up, not down, which surprised him. He had thought all the bank's important business happened in the dark beneath the streets, among the carts and the dragons and the vaults. Instead, he was brought along a corridor of dark paneling hung with portraits of goblins who had, the small brass plates informed him, variously conquered, ruled, negotiated, and been betrayed, and shown into a room with a single high window and a desk the size of a rowing boat, behind which sat a goblin so ancient that its skin had gone the gray of river stones. "Sit," said Nagnock. "You are late by 5 years and early by an hour. The first is not your fault." "Sit." Harry sat. The office smelled of ink and beeswax and something under both, a mineral smell, the smell of the deep places of the world where the bank kept the things it did not advertise. On the desk lay a shallow bowl of what looked like beaten silver, and beside it a knife with a black handle and a single sheet of thick parchment blank as a held breath. "You know why you are here," Nagnock said. "You know a little, you have been told less. Let us correct the balance." The old goblin folded its long hands. "First, the simple matter. Sirius Orion Black is dead. He left a will. The ministry has attempted, for reasons of its own, to freeze the estate of a man they declared a criminal and never tried. The bank does not recognize the authority of a government to steal from the dead in order to embarrass the living. Sirius Black named you his heir in full. Everything that was his is yours, the vaults, the properties, the seat of the House of Black upon the Wisengamot, the name if you want it and the burden of it whether you want it or not. This the bank confirms and will defend. Harry sat very still, something pressed at the back of his throat, and he did not let it move his face. Sirius, who had known him for 2 years and had spent one of them in a cave eating rats to stay near him, had left him everything, including the thing Sirius had hated most, which was the House of Black itself, its name, its long cruel history, its seat among the men who made the laws. He had left it to Harry the way you hand a loaded thing to the one person you trust to point it somewhere new. I accept, Harry said. Of course you do. Nagnock inclined its head. Now the harder matter. The one you were prevented from learning. The old goblin's eyes did not blink. Tell me, Mr. Potter, when you came into this bank at 11 years old with your key handed to you by another, did anyone speak to you of your inheritance? Did anyone read to you the account of your family? Did anyone tell you what you were owed, what you held, what waited in the dark under this floor with the name Potter graven on the door and older names graven under that? No, no, Nagnock let the words sit. Your key was held in trust. The trust was administered. The administrator drew over the years sums for your maintenance and for other purposes he did not itemize and was not, by the arrangement made, required to itemize. The arrangement was made in your infancy by a wizard who held, at that time, 3 offices at once: Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation, and the magical guardianship of one orphan child. He signed the papers in all 3 hands. The bank objected. The bank was overruled because the man who overruled us was, at that time, the law. The ancient face did not change, and its very stillness was the most eloquent contempt Harry had ever been shown. The impediment is now void. Your godfather's death made you, in the eyes of the old law your enemies have forgotten how to read, a head of house in your own right, emancipated by inheritance. Albus Dumbledore's guardianship ended the moment Sirius Black's will took force. The bank is delighted to inform you of this. We have waited some years for the pleasure. Harry looked at the bowl of silver and the black knife and the blank parchment, and he thought about a very old man who had left him on a doorstep in November and had come over the years to feel like the nearest thing he had to a grandfather, and who had, it turned out, held his purse and his name and his future in a locked drawer and drawn from it as he saw fit, all for the greater good, all with a twinkle, all without once asking the child on the doorstep what he wanted. He waited to feel the thing he would have felt a year ago. It did not come. What came instead was the flat, clean attention of the garden, the worm on the trowel, the cold that had replaced the rain. You said I'd be tested for what I am, Harry said, not for what I've been told I am. Test me. Nagnock's mouth moved, and this time it was very near a smile. The inheritance test, 3 drops. It reads the blood, and the blood remembers everything, which is why your enemies fear it and your kind have let it fall out of use. It will name your lines, all of them. Some men do not care for what it names. The goblin pushed the bowl and the knife a careful distance across the desk. The bank does not counsel you either way. The bank observes that a man who does not know what he is inherits nothing but other men's plans for him. Cut where you like, 3 drops, no more. The parchment is greedy. Harry took the knife. The black handle was warm, which it should not have been. He drew the edge across the pad of his thumb, and it parted the skin without any sensation of cutting, a clean cold line, and 3 beads of red welled and fell into the silver bowl, and the bowl drank them without a ripple. Then he tipped the bowl onto the parchment, and the parchment drank too, and the ink came up out of the paper from underneath, which is not how ink behaves, rising in fine dark lines that branched and forked and climbed, a tree drawing itself in reverse from its own leaves down toward a root it had not yet found. Harry James Potter, the parchment wrote at the crown of the tree, and then it fell. Son of James Charles Potter, son of Lily born Evans. It divided, it reached back. Potter, and behind Potter a name he half knew, and behind that the branching accelerated, generations peeling off to either side, and one line ran straight and deep down the center of the page, refusing to fork, running true through century after century of names in a language older than the parchment could quite render, until at the foot of that central line the ink pooled and thickened and set into 3 words that the paper seemed reluctant to hold. House of Peveril, it wrote. And beneath that, in letters that steamed faintly as they dried, line of the founders, Slytherin by conquest of magic unbroken. The room went very quiet. The mineral smell from under the beeswax grew stronger. Harry looked at the words and felt the cold in him lean toward them the way a compass leans north. Explain that, he said. Nagnock had not moved, but the ancient goblin was watching the parchment with an intensity that told Harry this was not a formality it had performed 1,000 times without interest. Peveril, you may have guessed. An old line thought extinct, folded into Potter generations ago through a marriage no one troubled to record because the Peverils had become a fireside story. That much is history, the other. The goblin's voice dropped, and the language of iron came into the edges of the English. The other is not lineage as your kind counts it. Read it again, by conquest of magic, not by blood. The parchment is precise where wizards are lazy. Salazar Slytherin left no children that survived to found a house. What he left was a legacy, a working, a claim, a door that opens only to a wizard the founder's own magic recognizes as kin in the way that mattered to him, which was never the pure line his descendants pretended it was. That claim has passed down the centuries to precisely one man in each generation, and only when the magic chooses, and for 100 years it chose no one at all, and the Gaunts starved and rotted in a hovel calling themselves the heirs of Slytherin while the true legacy passed them by like a river passing a drowned man. Then how does a wizard who has never studied it speak the serpent tongue? Nagnok's eyes glittered. You have wondered. You have been told it was borrowed, a scar's accident, a stain the Dark Lord left on you the night he failed to kill you. That is half a truth, which is the most dangerous kind. Hear the whole of it. The Dark Lord's curse rebounded that night and left something in you, yes. But a stain settles only where the surface will hold it. It found kin in you. It found the legacy already sleeping in your blood, the peveril line running back to the Founder's working, and it woke what was there. He did not give you the serpent tongue, Mr. Potter. He roused it. He put a fragment of himself into a vessel that was already, by the parchment's word, more Slytherin's heir than he could ever be, and he never knew it, because it would not have occurred to him that the infant in the crib was anything but an ordinary child. The goblin sat back. You are not the Dark Lord's accident. You are the Founder's heir, and the Dark Lord is the usurper who has spent 70 years squatting in a legacy that was never his, murdering in the name of a blood purity the Founder himself would have found beneath contempt. That is the truth the parchment gives you. Do with it what you can bear. Harry looked at the tree of his own blood burning slowly dry on the desk, and he heard very far off the sound of a door opening, not a real door, but the one the hat had offered him 5 years ago and he had begged to keep shut. He had spent 5 years afraid that the piece of Voldemort in him was the truth of him, that the parcel tongue and the cold and the quiet cruel voice were the enemy's fingerprints on his soul. He had built his whole idea of himself around resisting that. Be good, be brave. Be Gryffindor, do not be the thing the hat saw, and the hat had seen a Founder's heir and had told him he would be great, and he had wept and begged not to be. He put his cut thumb to his mouth without thinking and tasted iron and took it away. The blood purity, he said slowly. The whole doctrine, mudbloods, half-bloods, the sacred 28, Voldemort's entire war. You're telling me the Founder they all claim, the man whose name they've carved on their banners, would have laughed at them and then studied them and then used them and then discarded them, Nagnok said. Salazar Slytherin distrusted Muggle-born wizards for a reason that had nothing to do with the composition of their blood. He lived in an age when the Muggle world burned witches, and he did not trust children raised in that world not to run home and light the fire. It was fear, and it was of its time, and it was wrong, and it was still not what his descendants made of it. They took a dead man's caution and built a religion of hatred on it because hatred is easy and a legacy is hard. The true legacy, the thing the parchment recognizes in you, has nothing to do with any of it. It is older and colder and larger. It is not about who your mother was, it is about what you can hold. The goblin leaned forward, and its voice was almost gentle, which was terrible. And you can hold a great deal, Mr. Potter, the parchment does not say unbroken lightly. Harry turned the idea over, and it opened as he turned it, the way a good lock opens when the last pin lifts. The purists had built a cathedral on a corpse. Every marble hall of the old world, every sacred name in the Prophet's Society pages, every wand raised in Voldemort's ranks, all of it rested on a claim about blood that the Founder they worshipped would have laughed at across his own dinner table. That was not merely an offense. That was a fault line. A house built on a lie has one enemy it cannot defend against, which is the truth arriving with better manners and a clearer title. Bellatrix Lestrange could not curse a genealogy. Lucius Malfoy could not bribe a parchment. The whole apparatus of pureblood terror ran on the unexamined assumption that the heir of Slytherin was the man who killed the most Muggle-borns, and the assumption had never once been tested because no one had thought to test it, because the people it flattered had no interest in the answer. They've spent a century, Harry said slowly, murdering in the name of a man who would have found them useful for about a week and then had them poisoned for being tedious. And they've never checked. Not one of them has ever gone into the deep places and asked the magic whose side it's on because they were afraid of the answer or too certain to bother. Voldemort least of all. He's the vainest man alive. It has genuinely never crossed his mind that the legacy might not want him. He looked at the parchment, at the word unbroken cooling on the paper. That's not just a weakness, that's the weakness. Everything they are is downstream of a fact none of them has verified, and I can verify it. You are the verification, Nagnok said softly. You walk into their temple and the walls know you and do not know them. That is a kind of power older than the Wisengamot and colder than gold, and it cannot be bought and it cannot be forged, and it will not answer to the man who has spent 70 years believing he owns it. The goblin's eyes held his. But knowing the fault line and setting the charge are different disciplines, Mr. Potter. Many men have known where a wall was weak and died at the foot of it for lack of the patience to bring it down properly. Then I'll be patient, Harry said. I've had practice. Harry was quiet for a while. Outside the high window a cart shrieked somewhere far below in the dark under the streets, and a dragon answered it, a sound felt in the floor more than heard. He thought about the year behind him, the prophet, the toad. The blood on the back of his hand still faintly there in white lines if he turned it to the light. I must not tell lies. He thought about Sirius going through the veil. He thought about Dumbledore, who had known there was a prophecy that named Harry as the only one who could end Voldemort, and had let him find it in the worst possible way, in a ministry corridor with a friend on the floor and a godfather about to die, because the old man had judged that the truth would hurt less if it arrived too late to be useful. For the greater good, always the greater good, and Harry had always been the good that got spent for it. They made me a weapon, he said. He was not asking. Dumbledore, he's been raising me to die at the right moment, to take Voldemort with me, that's the shape of it. He's kept me poor and ignorant and grateful and hidden with people who hate me, so that when the time comes I'll have nothing to lose and no reason to hesitate and no one to run to. A boy with nothing walks into the fire more easily than a man with something to protect. Nagnok said nothing. It did not have to. The silence of a goblin who deals in truth is itself a kind of testimony. He was right, Harry said, and now something did move under the flat cold, something that had been cold a very long time. That's the part he'll never understand. He was right about all of it. He built exactly the weapon he wanted. He looked up, and whatever was in his face made the ancient goblin who had watched empires borrow and default across 3 centuries sit a fraction straighter. He just made one error in the arithmetic. A weapon with nothing to lose isn't a weapon that dies easily, it's a weapon that stops taking orders. The parchment had finished drying, the words stood on it, black and permanent, line of the founders, Slytherin by conquest of magic unbroken. I want to see it, Harry said, the legacy. Whatever the door opens onto, not today I imagine, you said the magic chooses, has it chosen? You are sitting in my office with the serpent tongue on your tongue and the founder's name drying on my desk, Nagnok said dryly. It chose some time ago, it has merely been waiting for you to stop running from it. There is a place, Mr. Potter, not the crude hole your usurper found beneath your school and called the Chamber of Secrets, which is a servant's entrance the founder built to impress the credulous. There is a true reliquary, and the bank has held its location in trust against the day and ere the magic acknowledged came to claim it, and I am authorized to tell you that day is today, and I am authorized to tell you nothing further until you have set your affairs in order, because a man who claims the founder's legacy with loose ends behind him tends not to survive the claiming. First we make you real in the world your enemies understand. Then you go into the dark and become what the parchment says you are. Make me real, Harry repeated. How? Nagnok drew the great ledger toward itself and dipped a quill and for the first time smiled without reservation, an expression of such pure and predatory satisfaction that Harry understood he had just become, in the eyes of the oldest institution in magical Britain, an extremely interesting client. Legally, Mr. Potter, we make you real legally. There is nothing in this world your enemies fear more than a man who knows exactly what the law owes him and has the gold to make it pay. The quill began to move. You hold as of this hour the vaults of House Potter no longer in trust, the vaults and estates of House Black, the dormant claim of House Peveril which I would advise you to activate, for it carries a Wisengamot seat that has been empty and voting by proxy for 400 years, and I can tell you precisely whose proxy has been casting it. You hold the founder's legacy which carries no seat, because the founder built the Wisengamot and did not deign to sit in a thing he considered furniture. 4 voices, Mr. Potter, where this morning you had none. In a chamber of 54 voices in one hand, wielded by someone who has read the statutes, is not a vote, it is a lever, and you have spent your life being moved by other men's levers. I imagine you have some curiosity about the other end of one. Harry looked at the ledger, at the columns filling, at the accounting of everything that had always been his and had been kept from him by men who called the keeping love. Whose proxy, he said, has been voting the Peveril seat, Nagnok told him. Harry did not react in any way a portrait would have thought worth recording. He simply sat and took it in and added it to the ledger he kept in himself, which had many more columns than the goblin's and balanced to a currency the goblin did not deal in. Then he's been sitting in my chair, Harry said, and voting with my voice for as long as I've been alive. For rather longer. He inherited the proxy from the wizard before him. It has become a habit of the office. Habits, Mr. Potter, are the softest thing in the world to break because no one remembers choosing them and so no one thinks to defend them. The goblin's quill stilled. You wish to be tested for what you are and not for what you were told. Here is the whole of it then in one sentence, and you may take it out of this room and do with it what your blood decides. You are the true heir of Salazar Slytherin, disinherited of your fortune, defamed by your government, orphaned by your enemy, raised as a weapon by your protector, and lied to by every adult who ever claimed to love you. And none of them, not one, knows what you are because none of them ever looked. You've been playing chess over your head your whole life, and every one of them believes he's playing white. Nagnok set down the quill. You are not a piece, Mr. Potter, you never were, you are the board. Somewhere in the deep the dragon shifted and the whole white weight of the bank settled a fraction on its foundations, and Harry Potter sat in the high cool office and felt the last of the rain go out of him for good. He thought of the worm in the garden, both halves writhing, each certain it was the whole animal. That was the wizarding world. That was the ministry that had tortured him and the order that had used him and the dark lord who had orphaned him and the old man who had signed his life away in 3 hands at once. Halves of a cut thing, all convinced they were whole, all thrashing, none of them able to see the trowel. He had spent 5 years trying to save the animal. He was done saving it. He was going to make it whole, and it would not thank him, and he found that he did not require its thanks. He required only that it be built right this time, on stone instead of wrought, and if the ones who had grown fat on the wrought had to be pulled out of the joists to do it, he discovered in himself no objection at all. That was the cold, that was what the hat had seen, not cruelty. Cruelty was Voldemort, cruelty was the toad, cruelty was small and hot and stupid, and it enjoyed itself. This was not that. This was the flat, clean attention of a man looking at a broken house and reaching at last for the proper tools. Activate the Peveril claim, he said. All of it today. I want the seat, and I want it known that the proxy is revoked, and I want the revocation to arrive on his desk in a way he cannot pretend not to have received. I want the vaults consolidated, and I want a full accounting of every nut drawn against my name for the last 15 years with dates, and I want it sworn to so that when I choose to use it, it is a document and not an accusation. And I want to know the location of the reliquary, and I want a week to close my affairs before I go into it, because you're right, I don't intend to die claiming what's already mine. Nagnok wrote it all down, every line. When it had finished, it set the quill in its rest and looked at the young man across the boat-sized desk with the expression of a creature that has waited a long career for exactly one client to walk through the door. There will be a cost, the goblin said. There is always a cost. The reliquary tests the air. The legacy is not a gift. It is a weight, and it settles on you and does not come off, and men who were not ready for it have gone into the founder's dark hole and come out as furniture. I am obliged to tell you this. The bank does not care whether you survive. The bank cares that you were warned. I've been a weapon aimed at my own death since I was 1 year old, Harry said. He stood. He put his cut thumb in his pocket and turned toward the door, and at the threshold he paused and looked back, and the light from the high window caught the green of his eyes and made them for a moment the color of something very old and very patient. A weight that doesn't come off doesn't frighten me, Nagnok. I've been carrying other men's weights my whole life. I'm only asking to carry one that's mine. He went out into the corridor of goblins who had conquered and ruled and been betrayed, and he walked past them the way a man walks past his own future hung on a wall, and he did not hurry, and he did not look back again. Behind him in the office, the ancient goblin sat for a long moment over the drying parchment. Then it rose and crossed to a cabinet that had not been opened in the memory of any goblin now living, and took from it a single black key on a chain of white gold, a key that was warm to the touch and shaped like no key made for any ordinary lock, and it held the thing up to the light from the high window and regarded it with the nearest thing its long gray face could make to reverence. Unbroken, it said in the language of iron folded on iron to no one at all. After all this time, unbroken. Outside in the alley, the gray afternoon had begun to think about rain. Harry stood on the white steps of the bank with 4 voices in one hand and a founder's dark waiting for him at the end of the week, and he looked down the crooked length of Diagon Alley at the shuttered shops and the frightened witches and the posters urging calm, at the whole broken half-thing thrashing in the road, and he did not feel the pull of pity he had spent his life mistaking for virtue. He felt the pull of the trowel. He drew his hood up against the coming weather and went down the steps, and walked back into the world he was going to remake. And the world, going about its small machinery of pretending everything in it was ordinary, did not so much as glance at the quiet young man passing through it, and had no idea at all that it had that afternoon in the space of one conversation in a high cool room, acquired a new architect and lost, forever, its right to remain as it was. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Founder's Reliquary. He closed his affairs the way a surgeon closes an incision, cleanly and without sentiment, and it took him 6 days. The first thing he did was leave. Grimmauld Place was his now, willed to him with the rest of the House of Black, and the wards that had answered to Sirius answered to Harry the moment the bank's parchment recognized him as head of house. He walked in through the front door at midnight and felt the old dark house turn toward him the way a dog turns toward the one who holds the lead, and Creature, who had spent a year muttering hatred into the walls, came up out of the kitchen and stopped dead on the stairs and looked at Harry with the yellow lamps of his eyes gone suddenly wide. "Master," the elf said, and the word came out of him bent, unwilling, dragged into the light by magic older than the elf's own spite. The house had chosen. Creature had no say in it and knew he had no say in it, and the knowledge folded him nearly double. "The blood of the house stands in the hall." "Yes," Harry said. He did not gloat. Gloating was a hot thing and he had no use for it. He looked at the elf who had helped kill Sirius by careful omission, by letting a lie stand, by loving a dead cause more than a living master, and he found in himself no wish to punish and no wish to forgive, only the flat, clean weighing of a resource. "You served this house when it was cruel because cruelty was what it asked of you. I'm going to ask something harder. You're going to keep this house and you're going to keep my secrets, and when I tell you a thing is to be forgotten, you will forget it so completely that a legilimens could pull your mind apart and find only the shape where the memory used to be. Can you do that?" Creature's eyes filled, which Harry had not expected, and the old creature pressed his forehead to the floorboards. "Master asks Creature to be good at the thing Creature is best at," he whispered. "The old mistress never asked, she only screamed." "I'm not going to scream," Harry said. "I'm going to build something. You can be part of it or you can be furniture. Choose tonight." By morning the drawing room had been aired and the doxies driven from the curtains and a fire laid, and Creature had chosen, and Harry sat at the long table with 15 years of stolen accounting spread in front of him and read every line. It was worse than he had let himself expect. Not the sums, though the sums were large, it was the pattern. The withdrawals against the Potter Trust had a rhythm to them, a quarterly regularity, small enough never to alarm a child who never saw a statement, and each was annotated in the bank's scrupulous hand with the purpose given by the man who authorized it. Sundry, guardianship expenses, order operations. And once a single line that Harry read 4 times, blood ward maintenance, privet drive, renewal. He had been paying out of his own inheritance for the wards that kept him prisoner in the house that hated him. Dumbledore had billed him for the cost of his own cage. Harry set the parchment down. Outside the tall, grimed window, a milk float whined along the square. He waited to feel the thing a boy would feel, and it did not come, and in its place there was only the ledger in him totting its cold columns and a resolve settling into place like a keystone. He did not send Dumbledore a raging letter. That was the temptation, and he recognized the temptation as a trap the old part of himself had laid, and he walked around it. He sent instead a single sheet of the bank's own headed parchment, on which Nagnok had drafted and Harry had signed a formal instrument revoking the proxy by which the Chief Warlock's office had, for the length of Harry's life and long before it, cast the vote of the House of Peveril in the Wisengamot. There was no accusation in it. There was no feeling in it at all. It was a legal document, correct in every particular, witnessed by the bank, and its only message was the one that lived in the fact of it. The heir has read the statutes and the heir has counted, and the heir is no longer available to be spent. He imagined the old man reading it over his morning tea, the twinkle going still. He allowed himself that much. On the fourth day, Remus Lupin came to Grimmauld Place because someone had noticed at last that Harry had gone, and the Order had spent 3 days in a controlled panic before working out where their weapon had walked to, and they had sent the gentlest of themselves to fetch it home. Harry. Lupin stood in the doorway of the drawing room with his hands open at his sides, the posture of a man approaching something he is not sure of. He looked older than the summer should have made him. Everyone's been frantic. Dumbledore's been beside himself. You can't just leave the protection, you know that. The wards at Privet Drive were paid for out of my vault, Harry said, without my knowledge, to keep me somewhere I could be found and used. Sit down, Remus, there's tea. Creature made it, and before you look like that, he made it willingly, which is more than the Order ever managed to get out of him. Lupin sat. He looked at the accounting still spread on the table, at the bank's parchment, at the young man across from him, who was not, he was beginning to understand, a child any longer in any sense that counted. You've been to Gringotts. I've been to the truth. It was closer than anyone let me believe. Harry poured. His hands were steady. I know about the guardianship. I know about the trust. I know Sirius left me everything and the Ministry tried to steal it and the bank stopped them and Dumbledore let them try, because a Harry with money and a name and a house is a Harry who might stop asking how high. I'm not angry with you, Remus. You didn't know. You're one of the ones who was lied to alongside me, which is why you're the one they sent. They wanted a face I'd trust. Lupin's throat moved. That's not it. Harry. Albus loves you. He does everything he's done. I know he loves me, Harry said, and this was the one true thing he let into his voice, and it landed harder for the flatness around it. That's the part that took me longest to understand. He does love me. He also intends for me to die at the correct moment, and he sees no contradiction in that because he loves the world more than he loves me, and he's decided in advance which one he's willing to spend. I don't blame him for the arithmetic. I blame him for doing it over my head for 15 years and calling it kindness. He pushed a cup across the table. Drink your tea. I'm not joining Voldemort if that's the fear. I'd sooner die. I'm not joining anyone. I'm done being a piece on other men's boards. That's all. Tell them that. Tell them exactly that, and tell them I hold 4 seats now, and tell them the next time the Order wants something from me they can request a meeting through my solicitor like everyone else who wants a share of the last Potter. Lupin did not drink his tea. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and something in the older man's face gave way not to fear but to grief that had been waiting a long time for an excuse. James would be, he began and stopped because he did not know how to end it because he no longer knew which word was true. James would be alive, Harry said quietly, if the same man who spent my life managing me had told him the truth about the people around him. I loved my father's story too, Remus. I've stopped needing it to sleep. He stood, which ended the audience without unkindness. You know the way out. The wards will let you pass. Come back when you want to see me and not when they send you to fetch me, and you'll always be welcome. Come back as their errand and Creature will show you the step. Lupin left. At the door he paused and looked back, and Harry saw the man weighing whether to say the thing that mentors say and deciding wisely that it would not survive contact with this new quiet and going without saying it. The front door shut. The old dark house settled around its rightful master, and Harry stood alone in the drawing room among the accounting of everything that had been stolen from him, and turned his mind at last to the dark that was waiting. On the 6th day the bank returned his letter with interest. Nagnok came in person, which the goblin informed him it had not done for a client in 40 years, and it came by a route the Order's watchers could not have traced if they had thought to look, straight into the drawing room of Grimmauld Place through a Gringotts door that had no business opening there, and it laid on the long table a black key on a chain of white gold that was warm to the touch, and shaped for no lock any locksmith had ever cut. The reckoning of the tide, the goblin said, and gave him the hours and the headland and the causeway and the single unforgiving rule of the place, which was that a man who mistimed the water would learn nothing further about the founder because he would learn nothing further about anything. The key opens the last door only, everything before it opens to your blood or does not open at all, and Mr. Potter. The ancient creature paused over the warm black key. Your letter has already done work you may not have intended. The chief warlock received the revocation of the Peveril proxy at the Wednesday sitting, in front of the full chamber, because I saw to it that the bank's herald delivered it publicly rather than by owl, and there is no way in the statutes to receive such a thing quietly. 50 of the most powerful witches and wizards in Britain watched Albus Dumbledore be told in open session that a seat he has voted for a century is no longer his to vote, and that the house it belongs to has an heir who has read the law well enough to take it back. Some of them will be frightened, some of them will be curious, all of them will be asking by tomorrow the same question, which is the most useful question you could possibly have planted in 50 ambitious minds at once. Who? Harry said. Nagnok's gray face creased. Who is Harry Potter that he holds 4 houses and answers to no one and takes his ancient seats out of the chief warlock's hand as if reclaiming an umbrella? You have spent your life as the answer to that question, Mr. Potter, and the answer has always been supplied by other men. The prophet's Potter, Dumbledore's Potter, the chosen one. For the first time, the chamber does not have an answer ready, and a powerful person without a ready answer is a powerful person who must go and find one, which means a powerful person who is, for a little while, looking at you and wondering instead of moving pieces past you while you look elsewhere. The goblin gathered its cloak. You have made yourself a mystery to the people who make the laws. It is the most valuable thing a young man in your position can be. Do not squander it by explaining yourself. Let them come to you with their guesses and choose from among their guesses the ones you would like to become true. Harry turned the black key over in his hand, and the warmth of it ran up his wrist and settled, and he understood that he had, without a single public word, without a rally or a manifesto or a drop of anyone's blood, already begun the campaign, not with an army, with a question. He had made 50 of the most dangerous people in the country curious, and curiosity in the hands of the powerful was the beginning of the habit of watching, and a man they were watching was a man they were no longer simply using. "Thank you," he said, and meant it, and the goblin inclined its head because it had learned over 6 days that this client's thanks, unlike most, were a form of accounting and not of flattery, and it valued them accordingly. When Nagnok had gone, Harry sat with the black key in his palm until the fire burned down, and he did not sleep, and he was not tired, and outside the tall grimed windows the city went about its small machinery of pretending nothing had changed. On the 7th day he went to claim what the parchment had named. The reliquary was not under Hogwarts. Nagnok had been contemptuous of the Chamber of Secrets, and Harry understood the contempt now that he stood where the bank's oldest records had sent him, on a headland at the ragged western edge of the country where the land gave out and the sea took over the argument. The chamber was a basilisk in a sewer, a schoolboy's idea of menace. This was something else. This was a place the founder had built to last past the memory of anyone who could betray it. The tide was going out. Below the cliff, revealed by the retreating water, a causeway of black stone ran out from the base of the rock toward a low island that had no business existing, a hump of the same black stone crowned with a single standing pillar, and the causeway was passable for perhaps 2 hours in every tide and drowned the rest, and Harry understood that the founder had built even the approach to be a filter. A man who did not know the hour would arrive to find the sea had eaten his road. A man who mistimed his return would be taken by the water on the way back. The whole coast was a lock, and the tide was the key, and only someone who had been told the reckoning could pass. He went down the cliff path with the wind pulling at him and salt in his teeth, and he set his foot on the causeway, and the black stone was dry and warm under his boot though the sea had covered it an hour before, and he understood that the warmth was the same warmth as the knife in Gringotts and the key on Nagnok's chain. The founder's magic, it knew him. It had been waiting for a footfall it recognized for the length of 1,000 years, and it recognized his. The pillar on the island was graven with serpents, and the serpents moved when he came near, not carved and pretending, but stone gone briefly to muscle, lifting their flat heads to taste him. He spoke to them without deciding to. The word came up out of the founder's part of him, the part the crib had roused, and it was not a word he could have said in English or would have been able to write down. The serpents heard it and knew it, and the pillar split from crown to root without a sound and opened onto a stair going down into the rock, and out of the opening came a breath of air that was not sea air, that was old and dry and mineral and enormous, the breath of a lung that had held itself for a millennium. Harry went down. The stair descended farther than the island was tall, farther than the sea floor, down into the living stone of the world, and it was not dark. The walls held a light of their own, a slow greenish luminescence woven into the rock like veins of ore, and by that light he saw that the stair was not rough-hewn but cut with a patience that beggared belief, every step true, the walls carved in a continuous frieze that told, as he descended, a story. He read it going down. 4 figures raising a castle out of a hillside. 4 figures parting, the tale of the founder's great quarrel told here from the 4th one's side. And then only one figure, the serpent-crowned one, walking away from the others down into the earth, building alone, going deeper than the quarrel could follow, laying down in stone and silence a legacy that would outlast the pettiness that had driven him out. Salazar Slytherin had not sulked in a chamber under a school. He had gone down into the bones of the island and built a monument to the proposition that he would be proven right by time, and time had passed, and here was time's answer walking down his stair with his tongue in its mouth. Partway down, the stair opened onto a landing, and the landing was a chamber, and the chamber was full of light that hung in the air without any source. Thousands of small flames, the color of drowned moons, floated at every height motionless, and each one, when Harry looked at it directly, showed a face inside itself the size of a thumbnail, a wizard or witch caught mid-word, mid-gesture, mid-life. He understood without being told that these were the ones who had come before him and failed the deeper trial, that the founder had not destroyed the men who answered his question wrong but had kept them, each folded into a cold flame, a library of every kind of wrong answer 1,000 years could produce. A gallery of the disqualified. Some of the faces were desperate, some were serene, which was worse. One, near the archway that led on and down, wore a face he half recognized from a portrait in the Black Family Gallery, a Gaunt or a cousin of Gaunt's, a man who had come to this landing believing his blood was his passport and had ended as a small blue flame lighting the way for the one who would prove him wrong. The flames did not bar his path. They only watched him pass, 10,000 failed claimants turning in their cold fire to see whether this one would be joining them, and the attention of that many dead ambitions pressing on his skin was the nearest thing to physical weight he had felt on the whole descent. He walked through the middle of them and did not hurry and did not linger on any single face, and at the far archway he stopped because the last flame, the one that hung directly in the door, was empty. No face. A waiting flame kept lit against an arrival, and as he came near it dimmed and drew aside and let him through, and he understood that the founder had lit a lamp for him 10 centuries before he was born and had trusted it to burn until he came. Something in the arrogance of that trust, the sheer patience of it, made the cold in Harry lean toward the dead founder as toward the first man in his life who had expected him to succeed. The stair went on. It ended in a hall. Harry stopped at the threshold, and for a moment the cold in him met something it had no defense against, which was awe. The hall was vast beyond the reason of anything built by hands. Its roof was lost in the greenlit dark far overhead, held up on columns carved as coiling serpents thicker than old oaks, and between the columns stood the founder's work, arranged down the length of the hall like the contents of a mine laid out for inspection. Cases of glass that was not glass, holding grimoires whose covers breathed. Basins of still black water that showed, when he passed, not his reflection but a slow procession of faces he did not know and one or two he did. Instruments of brass and bone whose purpose he could not name and whose beauty stopped the breath in his chest. Rings of standing stones no taller than his knee, humming to one another across the floor in frequencies he felt in his teeth. And down the center of it all, a channel of that same black water ran the length of the hall toward a dais at the far end. And on the dais stood a chair of black stone, plain and enormous, and the whole cathedral of the founder's genius was arranged to draw the eye at last to that empty seat. He walked the length of the hall toward it, and the founder's works woke as he passed, the grimoires stirring in their cases, the little stone rings raising their pitch, the black basins turning their faces toward him, and it was not menace. It was recognition. 10 centuries of patient magic turning like a field of flowers toward a sun it had been promised and had almost stopped believing in. At the third basin from the door, the black water would not let him pass without showing him something, and he stopped over it, and the still surface cleared. He saw the founder as no portrait had ever painted him, not the sallow ascetic of Slytherin house legend, but a big weathered man with burned hands and a laborer's shoulders, standing in the half-built castle among the other three, arguing. The vision had no sound, but Harry could read the shape of the quarrel in the bodies. The bright one, Gryffindor, wanted the doors thrown open to every child with a spark. The founder wanted a gate. And the reason the founder wanted a gate stood behind him in the water, the vision widening to show it. A village square, a stake, a woman burning while children who had loved her a week before threw kindling and screamed the word witch, and one small figure at the edge of the crowd, a child with a wand hidden in its sleeve, learning that survival meant handing over the ones who were different. The founder had not feared Muggle-born blood. He had feared the fire that Muggle-born children could be taught back home to light. He had been wrong to make a doctrine of it. He had been human to fear it. And his descendants, who had never smelled that particular smoke, had taken a frightened man's caution and pickled it into a religion of hatred that the founder in the water watched being born in his name with an expression Harry knew from his own mirror. The cold contempt of a builder watching fools mistake his scaffolding for his cathedral. The water cleared, the vision let him go. He understood now, past any argument, that the whole blood purity edifice was not merely evil but illiterate, a 1,000-year misreading of a dead man who would have burned their pamphlets to warm his hands, and that the most devastating thing he could do to Voldemort's cause was not to defeat it in the field but to prove from the founder's own reliquary that it had never once understood the man it worshipped. He was halfway to the dais when the water rose. Came up out of the central channel without violence, a column of the black water standing itself upright, and it took a shape, and the shape resolved, and Harry stopped walking because the thing the water had made was himself, not a reflection. A double standing in the channel, water given the exact form and face and stance of Harry Potter, and when it spoke the voice was his own and the words it said were the ones he had spent a year refusing to think. "You came for power," said the thing wearing his face. "Say it plainly down here where the founder's magic can hear whether you lie. You told the goblin you came to build. You told the wolf you came for the truth. But you are alone now at the bottom of the world with a throne in front of you and no one to perform virtue for, so say it. You came because you are tired of being small. You came because they made you a weapon and you would rather be the hand. You came for power and everything else is the story you tell so you can sleep." The hall waited. The green light held its breath. Harry looked at the thing wearing his face and understood with the flat, clean attention that had replaced his fear that this was the trial, that the founder's last filter was not tide or stone or serpent but this, a question asked at the bottom of the earth where a man could not lie and live, and that men had come this far and answered it wrong and were, even now somewhere in this hall, standing very still and being furniture. "No," Harry said. The double tilted its head with his own habitual motion. "No, you've got it backwards and the founder built you to catch the ones who don't notice." Harry took a step closer to the thing in the water, and the water flinched, which told him he was right. "You think the trap is a man who says he came to build when he really came for power. It isn't. Voldemort came for power and told everyone so and called it honesty, and it made him a monster, because a man who wants power for its own sake will burn the world down to keep warm. That's not the test. The test is whether I know the difference between the two things you're pretending are the same." He looked into his own green eyes made of black water. "I did come because I'm tired of being small. That's true, and I won't pretend it isn't. But small isn't the opposite of powerful. Small is the opposite of free. I don't want the throne so that people will kneel. I want it so that no one can ever again do to a child what was done to me and call it the greater good. Power is the tool, it is not the point. And the fact that I can tell the tool from the point standing here alone with no one to perform for is the entire reason the door opened for me and stayed shut for him. The water held its shape a moment longer. Then it lost interest in his face, the features running, the column sinking back into the channel with a sound like a held breath finally let go, and where it had stood the black water lay flat and empty and Harry saw his own true reflection in it for the first time since he had come down the stair. But the trial was not finished. The Founder's magic had one more filter and it did not come from the water, it came from inside him. It rose the way the water had risen, up out of a place he had spent years pretending was a scar and nothing more, and it wore a face too, but the face it wore was not his. It was the face of the thing that had put itself in the crib, the fragment, the sliver of the man who had murdered his parents, lodged in him for 15 years and roused by the Founder's magic to defend the seat it thought was its own. It came up behind his eyes in a flood of cold that was not his cold, a hot cold, a hungry cold, and it reached for the Founder's works arrayed down the hall with an appetite Harry recognized because he had felt its echo every time he had wanted just for a moment to hurt someone who had hurt him. Take it, the fragment said inside him in the high cruel voice that had never once, in all the years it had lived in him, spoken to him directly until now. Take all of it. You are right that it is yours and not his, so take it and use it as he never dared and be what the pale old fool was too frightened to become. We want the same things, you and I, we always have. Why do you think you can speak my tongue? And there it was. The oldest fear, the one under all the others, the one Dumbledore had never had the courage to name and Harry had never had the courage to face. That the darkness in him was not Slytherin's legacy at all but Voldemort's stain, that the cold and the ambition and the quiet capacity to weigh a person like a resource were the enemy's fingerprints on his soul, that at the bottom of himself, if he ever went down to look, he would find the Dark Lord looking back. He went down to look. He did not fight the fragment because he understood in the greenlit dark that fighting it was what it wanted, that struggle was how it had survived, feeding on his terror of it for 15 years, growing fat on his refusal to look at it directly. So he did the thing it could not survive. He turned and faced it, and he looked at it with the flat, clean attention of the garden, the worm on the trowel, and he saw it for what it was, which was small. A splinter. A frightened, murderous fragment of a frightened, murderous man, hiding in a child because it could not bear to be nothing, mistaking its host's ambition for kinship because it had never in its existence encountered ambition that was not also cruelty and did not know there was a difference. We don't want the same things, Harry told it, and he said it gently, which was the cruelest thing he could have done to it. You want to live forever because you're terrified of dying and you'll unmake the whole world to buy yourself another hour. I'm not afraid of dying. I found that out this summer when I understood they'd raised me to do it. That's the difference you never understood in 70 years of tearing your soul apart to escape it. I'm not you, I never was. You've been living in a house you thought was empty and it was never empty. It was only waiting for the owner to come home. And he reached into himself, into the Founder's part of him that the crib had roused, and he found the seam where the splinter had lodged, and the Founder's magic was all around him now in the columns and the water and the light, and it knew him, and it lent him its patience, and with the Founder's patience he did not tear the splinter out. He simply stopped being a place it could stay. He became, from the inside, wholly and finally himself, so completely his own that there was no crack left for another man's soul to inhabit, and the fragment evicted had nowhere to go, and it came apart with a sound like a scream heard through deep water, and the black basins down the length of the hall flared and drank it, and it was gone, and the scar on Harry's forehead, which had ached for 5 years whenever the enemy was near, went cool and silent and stayed that way. He stood in the greenlit hall with the last of another man's soul dissolving in the Founder's water, and he was, for the first time since a night he could not remember, alone in his own skull, and the aloneness was so vast and so quiet that it took him a moment to recognize it as freedom. He walked the rest of the length of the hall. The Founder's works turned to follow him. He climbed the low steps of the dais. He did not sit in the black stone chair because he understood now that the chair was not the legacy. The chair was a symbol, and he had had enough of symbols to last several lives. Beside the chair, on a plinth of the same stone, lay the thing the whole cathedral had been built to protect, and it was not a crown or a weapon or a hoard. It was a book. A single book, bound in scaled hide gone black with age, closed and waiting. And when Harry laid his hand on its cover, the cover was warm, and the clasp opened for him, and the Founder's whole mind lay under his palm. 1,000 years of magic that the corrupt and the frightened and the merely stupid had never been fit to read, warding and Minecraft, and the deep serpent magic that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with will, statecraft and healing and the working of great old rites that could shape a country the way a lesser magic shaped a stone. Not dark magic, not light. Old magic from before the men who came after had cut the world in half and named the halves and spent 1,000 years at war over the cut, each half writhing, each certain it was the whole. The Founder's voice was not in the book exactly, but the Founder's intention was, and it reached Harry through his palm on the warm scaled cover, and what it said was not a command. It was a question, the last one, the one the whole descent had been built to earn the right to ask. You have proven you can hold it, the intention said in no language, in the deep place under language where the Founder had gone to be understood by the one man in 1,000 years fit to understand him. Now tell me what you will hold it for. The others took my caution and made it a cage. Will you take my power and make a better one, or only a larger? Harry stood on the dais at the bottom of the world, with a founder's mind under his hand and the last of his enemy's soul dissolving in the dark behind him and 4 seats in a distant chamber already answering to his name, and he gave the founder the truth because it was the only currency that spent down here. A better one, he said, not because I'm good. I've stopped believing in good the way they sold it to me, because a cage is what frightened men build and I'm done being frightened. I'm going to take the thing they broke and build it right on stone, and the ones who grew fat on the rod are going to hate me for it, and I'm going to let them, and I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm not going to ask permission because I've learned what asking permission costs. That's what I'll hold it for. A world that doesn't leave children on doorsteps and call it protection. If that makes me a dark lord in the prophet, then the prophet can print what it likes. I'll have rewritten the paper by then. The book closed under his hand, gently, the clasp latching, and the warmth of it ran up his arm and did not stop, and the founder's magic came up out of the hall and into him, not as a violence but as an inheritance finally, formally, irrevocably paid, and the green light flared to gold along every vein of ore in the vast walls, and every serpent on every column lifted its stone head at once and looked at the man on the dais, and the cathedral of Salazar Slytherin acknowledged. After 1,000 years of waiting that its owner had come home. He tried it before he left because a tool you have not tested is only a rumor, and he had built his new life on the principle of never again believing a thing he had not verified himself. He chose the smallest working in the Founder's book, a ward sign meant to seal a threshold, and he did not speak it aloud, because the Founder's magic did not live in the mouth the way school magic did. It lived lower in the will, in the same place the serpent tongue came from. He raised his hand toward the archway he had entered by and reached for the shape of the thing, and the magic answered him as deep water answers a diver who stops fighting it and lets it hold him up. A line of pale gold drew itself across the stone of the arch, root to crown, a serpent of light that settled into the rock and sank and became part of it, and he knew with the certainty that had become his native sense that no wizard who did not carry the Founder's recognition in his blood would ever cross that threshold again without the stone knowing his name and the hall deciding whether to let him keep it. It had cost him almost nothing. That was the part that reordered his understanding of everything he thought he knew about magic. He had spent 5 years watching grown wizards sweat and shout to move a feather, watching Dumbledore himself labor at the great workings, and here was power that ran off the will alone, that treated the effortful magic of the schools as a man treats the babbling of a child learning to speak, fondly and from a great height. He had not become stronger exactly. He had become fluent. The wizarding world spoke magic the way tourists speak a language, in memorized phrases, loudly, hoping to be understood. He had just been handed the grammar, and the grammar was 1,000 years deep, and it had been waiting in his blood the whole time for someone to teach it how to read itself. When Harry Potter climbed back up the long stair into the salt wind of the world, the tide had turned, and the causeway was already half under the coming water, and he walked out across the drowning black stone without hurrying. And the sea, which had swallowed better men for less, drew back its hand and let the Founder's air pass dryshod to the shore. He stood on the headland in the last of the light with the Founder's book heavy and warm against his ribs, and a country full of frightened, rotten, salvageable people spread out to the east behind the falling dark. And he did the arithmetic cold and clean as he would do it now for the rest of his life without any pity that might slow his hand. Voldemort, who thought himself the heir and was a squatter, and did not yet know his splinter had been evicted from the one skull that had carried it. The ministry, rotten to the beam and voting itself richer while the country burned. Dumbledore, who loved him and had priced him and would, when he understood what had walked out of the sea, be the most dangerous of the three because the old man's error was never malice. It was certainty, 3 problems, 1 board, and for the first time the pieces in his own hand instead of over his head. He turned east into the dark toward the work, and the wind took the smell of the sea off him and gave him back to the land, and somewhere far to the south a very old man sat up suddenly in a circular office among his whirring silver instruments, because one of them had, without warning, stopped, the one that had tracked a certain scar for 15 years, gone still and cold and final. And Albus Dumbledore looked at the silent instrument for a long moment, and understood that something he had built his entire plan upon had that evening quietly ceased to exist, and that he did not know why, and that not knowing why was a sensation he had not been made to feel in a very long time. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Architecture of Power. The Wisengamot met on the first Wednesday of the month in a chamber shaped like a well, tiers of plum-robed seats rising in rings toward a domed ceiling of enchanted stone, and Harry Potter walked into it at the age of 16 through a door reserved for members, which he was because he had read the statutes, and the statutes did not care how old a head of house happened to be. He had dressed for it. Not in robes borrowed from a schoolboy's trunk, but in charcoal wool cut by a tailor in Diagon Alley who had been paid, for the first time in his career, to make a young man look older and colder than his years, and had succeeded. Harry came down the aisle without hurrying, and the murmur of 50 conversations thinned as he passed, and by the time he reached the floor of the well, the chamber had gone quiet enough to hear the enchanted torches breathing. Rufus Scrimgeour occupied the minister's box, lion-maned and limping, watching the newcomer with the flat professional interest of a man who had spent his life deciding whether things were threats. In the high central chair under the arms of the 4 founders worked in gold above his head, sat Albus Dumbledore, and the old man's face when he saw who had come did the thing Harry had waited a summer to watch it do. It stopped twinkling. The chamber recognizes, in tone the keeper of the rolls, a desiccated wizard whose entire function was to read names and be right about them. The presence of a claimant, state your houses and your business. Harry James Potter. His voice carried without effort in the well's acoustics, which had been built by the founders to make sure no one in the chamber could pretend not to have heard. Head of the House of Potter. Head of the House of Black by the will of Sirius Orion Black, confirmed by Gringotts and defended by the same against a ministry seizure that had no basis in any law this body ever passed. A shift ran through the plum robes at that, a small collective flinch, because everyone present knew about the seizure and no one had expected it named on the floor. Head of the House of Peveril reactivated, whose seat has been voted by proxy for 400 years by the office of the Chief Warlock, a proxy I revoked last Wednesday as this body witnessed. Dumbledore did not move. Beside and below him, a wizard Harry had marked on the way and leaned forward, an elder of the pureblood bench, silver-haired and straight-backed, robed in the deep green his house had worn since the chamber was built, with a face like a closed ledger. Arcturus Selwyn, who spoke for the old families the way a lawyer speaks for a client he privately despises but profitably represents. He said nothing yet. He was a man who let others spend their words first. 3 houses, said the keeper of the rolls, consulting his scroll. The chamber records 3 seats. Is there further business? There's a 4th, Harry said, the quiet changed quality. The charter of this chamber, Harry went on, and here he did not raise his voice because the founders' acoustics did the raising for him, was written by the 4 who built Hogwarts. 3 of them took seats. The 4th built the room and reserved a chair and never filled it, and left in the founding charter a single clause governing when it might be filled, which I will now ask the keeper of the rolls to read aloud, since it is his function to read and be right. Harry turned his head unhurried toward the desiccated wizard. Section the 1st, the founder's provision, read it. The keeper of the rolls looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore, who could have stopped it with a word and understood at once that stopping it would look worse than allowing it, inclined his head a fraction, and the keeper unrolled a scroll so old its enchantment had to be coaxed to release the ink, and read in a voice that cracked on the older words. The founder's chair shall stand empty and draped against the day, if such a day should come, that his blood or his working returns a true heir to this hall, which heir the chamber shall know by the ancient recognition and by no lesser proof. And upon that day the drape shall be lifted, and the founder's voice shall sit among the 50 as the first of them, holding no more votes than any and no fewer, but holding the founder's chair, which is a thing this body has been without for 1,000 years. The keeper lowered the scroll. His hands were unsteady. I have never read that clause in session. It has never been called. It's being called now. Harry looked up, past the plum tiers, to the far side of the domed chamber where, high against the wall, a single chair stood behind a drape of dust-gray velvet that no hand had touched in 10 centuries. I am the founder's heir by the ancient recognition, and I can prove it by the only proof the charter accepts, which is the recognition itself. Test me, keeper. The charter tells you how. It's the next line. The keeper of the rolls, who had spent 40 years in a job he had believed to be ceremonial, read the next line with the expression of a man discovering that the museum piece on his desk is loaded. The heir shall speak the founder's tongue before the chamber, and the chamber's own stone shall answer, for the stone was quarried from the founder's holding and remembers its master. Harry turned to face the wall of the well, the raw enchanted stone between the tiers of seats, and he spoke. He did not speak loudly. What came out of him was the serpent tongue, the low sibilant grammar that no throat in that room but his could shape, and he did not translate it, and he did not need to, because the stone did the translating in a language older than words. The wall of the well, which had stood mute through 1,000 years of legislation and war and petty ambition, woke. A line of pale gold ran up it from the floor, branching, climbing, the same serpent of light Harry had drawn in the founder's reliquary, and it spread across the chamber's stone until the whole well glowed faintly gold from within, and every witch and wizard in the plum robes felt it in their teeth and their fillings and the roots of their hair, the founder's magic acknowledging its heir in the house the founder had built, and across the chamber the dust-gray drape over the empty chair lifted itself without a hand. Enfolded itself and settled, and the founder's chair stood revealed for the first time since before the Norman ships, waiting for a man to sit in it. Nobody spoke. Scrimgeour had come half out of the minister's box. Selwyn, the silver-haired elder, sat with his closed ledger face open at last, and what was written in it was not defiance. It was calculation running very fast. I don't intend to sit in it today, Harry said, and let the gold light fade from the stone and turn back to the chamber as if he had done nothing more remarkable than table a motion. I claimed it so that the record would show it claimed, and so that this body would understand something that the Dark Lord's followers have built their entire war upon not understanding. The founder they murder in the name of does not recognize them. He recognizes me. Every wizard in Britain who has ever raised a wand for blood purity in the name of Salazar Slytherin has been raising it in the name of a man who just now, in this chamber in front of the 50 of you, chose someone else. He let that sit exactly as long as it needed to. I'll take my 3 seats, keeper. The founder's chair can wait until I've earned the right to sit in it in front of people who'll believe I earned it. But it's mine, and the record will say so, and I'd suggest the chamber's newest members read the charter more carefully than its oldest ones apparently have. He climbed to the seats of his houses, 3 together on the Peveril tier where 400 years of proxy votes had kept the cushions from rotting, and he sat, and the session went on around him in a daze of procedure, and he cast his 3 votes on the day's ordinary business precisely and correctly and gave no one anything further to look at. And the entire time, from the high central chair, Albus Dumbledore watched him with the expression of a man rereading a letter he thought he had understood. Harry did not look back at him. He had learned over a summer that the surest way to unsettle a man who has spent his life being the cleverest person in every room is to behave as though you have not noticed he is in it. Rufus Scrimgeour caught him in the corridor outside the chamber which Harry had allowed because a man who does not wish to be caught in a corridor does not walk down it slowly. Mr. Potter. The minister fell into step, favoring his bad leg, his voice pitched for privacy in a hall full of departing plum robes. That was a considerable performance, the stone lighting up, the old charter. My people are already fielding questions from 3 foreign ministries who want to know whether Britain has misplaced a monarch. He smiled without warmth, the smile of a hunter who respects the animal. I'll be direct because I'm told you value it and because I haven't the patience left in me for the other kind. The ministry is losing this war, not on the battlefield yet, but in the only place that decides wars, which is the part of the public mind that believes its government can protect it. That belief is bleeding out. And you have just walked into the Wisengamot and demonstrated in front of 50 witnesses and 100,000 readers by morning that there exists in this country a young man the ancient magic itself has chosen. Do you understand what that is worth to a government that is running out of reasons to be believed? You want me to stand next to you, Harry said, in photographs at the right moments. The heir of Slytherin at the minister's shoulder so that the country transfers the credit of the ancient magic onto the ministry that's failing it. You want to borrow my standing to pay down your deficit of belief. He kept walking. Fudge wanted to call me a liar, you want to call me an ally, it's the same transaction, minister. You've both looked at me and seen a resource, and the only thing that's changed is the price of the day. Scrimgeour's jaw worked. And what, he said, is the difference in the end between a resource and a citizen if the cause is just? Consent, Harry said. That's the whole of it. A citizen is asked, a resource is spent. I've been spent my entire life by people who told me the cause was just, and every one of them was sure, and Sirius Black is dead of their certainty. He stopped at the head of the marble stair and looked at the minister without any of the deference the office was accustomed to collecting. I'm not going to stand next to you, minister, but I'll tell you something more useful than a photograph for free because you at least had the decency to ask instead of to seize. Your government isn't dying because it's losing the war. It's losing the war because it's already dead and hasn't been told. It stopped being able to protect people the day it decided that protecting itself came first, and every person in this country can feel the difference, and no photograph of me is going to fix a thing they can feel. If you want to survive what's coming, stop trying to borrow legitimacy and start trying to deserve it. Try the people you've been imprisoning without trial. Pay the ones you've been robbing. It won't be enough and it'll be too late, but it's the only medicine there is, and I'm the only person who'll tell you so without wanting your office in exchange. He went down the stair and left the Minister of Magic standing at the top of it, and Rufus Scrimgeour watched him go with the expression of a man who has asked a fortune-teller a question in jest and been handed his own death date in earnest. The Greengrass invitation reached him 2 days later. It came without a ministry seal or an order owl on cream paper in a hand he did not know, and it proposed a meeting at a tea room in a wizarding village Harry had never visited at an hour when the place would be empty, and it was signed with a single name and no title. Daphne Greengrass. He knew the name as he knew most of his year's names, as a fact without a face attached. Slytherin, his own age, one of the girls who had spent 5 years neither cursing him in corridors nor defending him, occupying the wide neutral country between the chosen one and the sons whose fathers wore masks. He turned the invitation over. There was no crest, which was itself a message. A family that owned a crest and declined to use it was a family telling you that the meeting had not happened. He went. She was already there when he arrived, at a table in the back with a view of both doors, which told him something useful before either of them had spoken. She was tall and composed, and she watched him cross the room with the frank assessing attention of someone pricing a horse, and she did not stand and she did not offer her hand, and when he sat she poured him tea he had not asked for correctly, the way you pour for an equal you have decided to take seriously. You caused a great deal of trouble on Wednesday, she said. My father came home from the sitting and drank brandy at 4 in the afternoon, which he does perhaps twice a year. Once was the night the Dark Lord returned, the other was Wednesday. She set down the pot. He wasn't frightened of you, that's what I came to tell you, and it's worth more than you'll understand yet. He was frightened of what everyone else is going to do now that you exist. Do you know what you've done? Tell me. Harry drank the tea. It was good. I'd rather hear your version than my own. Mine's flattering. That earned him a look, quick and reassessing, the look of a person who had come expecting either a hero or a would-be Dark Lord and was recalibrating for something she had not budgeted for. For a generation, Daphne said, there have been 2 powers in this country, and everyone not stupid enough to love one of them has spent their lives trying to survive the space between. The Dark Lord who wants blood. The ministry which wants obedience and calls it order. My family and about 40 others like it, the old neutral houses, have kept our heads down and our vaults full and our children out of both armies, because when you're caught between 2 millstones the only strategy is to be too small to grind. That's who we are. The Grey, the cowards, the Order would say, the traitors in waiting, the Dark Lord's people would say, the survivors we would say if anyone asked, which no one does. She folded her hands. And on Wednesday, a third thing walked into the Wisengamot and made the stone light up. And now there's a fault running down the middle of the board that wasn't there before, and 40 families who have spent 20 years learning to survive two powers have to learn overnight how to survive three. Or, Harry said, how to back the third one. Or that. She did not flinch from it. Which is the other reason I'm here, and the more dangerous one, and the one my father would deny sending me to say if you ever repeated it. Say it plainly, since we're both people who prefer plain. What are you? Not what the prophet says, not what Dumbledore's people will start saying by Friday, you in your own words to my face where I can watch you say it. Harry set down the cup. He had known this question would come from someone, and he had decided in advance not to lie to the first person clever enough to ask it well. Because a lie told to the clever is an investment that pays its dividend at the worst possible moment, and Daphne Greengrass was clearly clever and had come alone, which either meant courage or authority, and in his experience usually meant both. I'm the man who's going to end the thing your family has spent 20 years surviving, he said. Not the way Dumbledore wants to end it, which is to beat Voldemort and hand the country back to the same ministry that let him rise twice, so the grandchildren of the Grey families can do this all again in 50 years. I'm going to end the arrangement, the whole thing, 2 millstones and a frightened middle. I'm going to take it apart and build something that doesn't require 40 families to raise their children as hostages to their own caution. He held her eyes. I'm not good, Miss Greengrass. I want to be clear about that, because you'll be told I'm either a hero or a monster, and neither is true, and both are useful to me. I'm an architect. I've looked at the house, and the house is rotten, and I've decided to rebuild it, and I'm going to do that whether the current tenants like it or not, and some of them are going to be very unhappy about the noise. But I'm not going to build it on anyone's blood. That's the Founder's mistake and Voldemort's, and I've been down into the Founder's own dark, and I've seen what that mistake cost, and I'm not making it. I want the Grey, not as hostages. As citizens of the thing I'm building, that's the offer. It's the only one I'm going to make, and I'm making it to you first because you asked the right question. Daphne Greengrass looked at him for a long moment, and whatever she had come prepared to find, it was not this, and she was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. You understand, she said slowly, that I'm going to take the whole thing apart is exactly what the Dark Lord says, word for word. It's the sentence every dangerous man in history has said before he started killing people who were previously merely inconvenient to him. Yes, Harry said, it is. And the only difference between me and him is what I'm willing to do to the people who get in the way. And you have no way to verify that difference except by watching me over time decline to do the things he would do. I can't prove I'm not him. I can only be not him in public repeatedly until the pattern is undeniable. I'm asking your family to watch the pattern instead of the promise. Promises are what the ministry runs on. I'd rather be judged on the ledger. Something in her face changed at the word ledger, some recognition, and he understood that he had, without planning it, said the thing that a family of pragmatic survivors would find most reassuring, which was that he thought like an accountant and not like a prophet. I'll carry that to my father, she said at last. I won't tell you what he'll do with it because I don't know, and because a Greengrass who promised on her house's behalf without the house's leave would be a foolish Greengrass, and my father did not raise fools. She rose and gathered her cloak and paused. One thing for free because you were honest and it cost you something, and I noticed. Watch Selwyn, not the Dark Lord's open people, Selwyn. He sat in that chamber on Wednesday and watched the Founder's stone light up for you. And where every other pureblood in the room saw a threat to their doctrine, he saw an opportunity, and a man who can look at the thing that should terrify him and see an opportunity instead is the most dangerous man in any room. My father says Selwyn is the only person in the Wisengamot who is genuinely more intelligent than Dumbledore and the only one patient enough to hide it. She drew up her hood. Hilk. Soon with an offer that sounds like an alliance and is actually a leash. Don't take his tea, or if you take it, don't drink it before he does. She left through the door that gave the better line to the street, and Harry sat alone in the empty tea room with a cooling pot and a name to add to his ledger, and he added it and underlined it because the girl had been right about everything else and there was no reason to think she was wrong about this. Selwyn came on Friday, as she had said. He did not send an invitation. He simply appeared at Grimmauld Place, which should not have been possible, and the fact that it was possible was itself the opening move. A demonstration that the old families had ways past the Fidelius that the Order had never suspected, laid down generations before Dumbledore was born. Kreacher announced him with an expression of such violent conflict that Harry understood the elf's old loyalties were at war with his new ones, the House of Selwyn being precisely the sort of ancient pureblood name Kreacher had been bred to grovel before. Lord Selwyn, Kreacher managed, is at the door, master, and Kreacher told him the house does not receive, and Lord Selwyn said the house would receive him, and Kreacher did not know how he made Kreacher believe it. Let him in, Harry said. And Kreacher, whatever he offers you, whatever old word he uses, you belong to this house now, and this house does not answer to Selwyn. Say it back to me. This house does not answer to Selwyn, the elf whispered and stood straighter for having said it and went to admit the guest. Arcturus Selwyn entered the drawing room the way weather enters a valley, without hurry and without any doubt of his welcome, and he looked around the ancestral seat of the House of Black with the appreciation of a connoisseur and the faint proprietary sadness of a man surveying a great collection fallen to an unworthy heir. He was old, but not in the way Dumbledore was old. There was nothing benign about it. He wore his age the way a blade wears its years, thin to the essential. You've let the place go, Selwyn observed, seating himself uninvited in the better chair. Wahlberger would weep, though I imagine you consider that a recommendation. He set a silver flask and two small cups on the table between them, his own provision, and Harry did not miss it and did not comment on it and did not touch it. I'll be direct, Mr. Potter, because I've watched you for a week and directness is the only dialect you seem to respect. You've done something extraordinary and you've done it clumsily, and I've come to teach you to do it well in exchange for a consideration we can discuss once you've grasped the offer. You've come to put me on a leash, Harry said, and you've brought your own cup so that I'll drink something you've prepared or refuse it in front of you and reveal that I know to be afraid. Miss Greengrass warned me you'd do both. She was right about the cups. Let's see if she was right about the leash. He leaned back. Make the offer, Lord Selwyn, properly. I'll tell you what's wrong with it, and then we'll both know exactly where we stand, which is worth more to me than tea. Selwyn's closed-litter face opened for the second time in a week, and again what was written in it was not anger. It was pleasure, the rare and specific pleasure of an intelligent man who has been braced for tedium and handed a game instead. He poured for himself and drank, and only then poured the second cup and pushed it a courteous distance across the table, the small concession of a duelist acknowledging a touch. The offer, he said, is this. The old families have money and law and 400 years of knowing which magistrate is bribable and which is merely vain, which you do not and cannot acquire in a summer and will need before the winter. In exchange, we ask only that when you take the whole edifice apart, as you announce to 50 people you intend to, you build the new one with the old families still on top of it. Not the blood doctrine. We're not fools. The blood doctrine is a dead man's idea, and you've just proved the dead man never held it. We can let blood purity die. What we cannot let die is us. The Selwyns, the Greengrasses, the 40 houses. Keep us on top in the new arrangement as in the old, and every resource we possess is yours, and you will win, Mr. Potter, because with us behind you, you cannot lose. He drank again. That is the leash Miss Greengrass warned you about, and I'll grant it as a leash, and I'll ask you to consider that a leash held by people who want the same victory you do is called, in most languages, an alliance. Harry looked at the cup and did not drink it, not from fear now but from principle, because a man who accepts the second cup has accepted the frame in which cups are offered, and he had no intention of accepting Selwyn's frame. That's a good offer, he said. It's the best one I'll get, and it's a trap, and the reason it's a trap is the thing you think is its strength. You want to keep the 40 families on top. But on top is the whole disease, Lord Selwyn. A world with a permanent top is a world that will always, eventually, decide it needs a permanent bottom to sit on. And once you have a bottom, you have a Voldemort, because someone at the bottom will always be angry enough to burn the arrangement down, and someone at the top will always be frightened enough to reach for a monster to stop him. Your 40 families aren't the solution to the war I'm ending. You're the reason it keeps happening. I'm not going to keep you on top. I'm going to make on top a smaller, colder, more temporary place than it's ever been, held by whoever's most useful this decade and lost the moment they stop being useful, and your families can compete for it on the merits like everyone else, and if you're as clever as Miss Greengrass says, you'll do well, and if you're only rich, you won't. He met the old man's eyes. That's my counteroffer. You don't get a leash. You get a fair contest, which for a Selwyn is probably more terrifying because you've never once had to find out whether you'd win one. The silence that followed was the most attentive silence Harry had produced all week. Then Arcturus Selwyn did something Harry had not predicted. He laughed. It was a dry sound, unpracticed, the laugh of a man who did it rarely and meant it when he did, and he set down his cup and looked at the 16-year-old across the table with an expression that had traveled a great distance from where it started. Do you know, he said, in 50 years in that chamber no one has ever refused me and told me the truth about why in the same breath. They refuse and flatter, or they accept and resent. You've done the one thing I had no counter prepared for, which is decline my protection and offer me a fair fight. And the appalling part, Mr. Potter, is that a fair fight is exactly the thing my class has spent 400 years ensuring never happens, because we have always suspected in the privacy of our own accounting that we might not win one. He rose. He left the second cup where it stood. I won't ally with you, not yet. You've offered terms my house cannot accept, and I respect the terms too much to pretend otherwise. But I'll tell you what I'll do instead, as a professional courtesy between the only two people in that chamber who understand what's actually happening. I'll wait. I'll watch you fight the Dark Lord and the Old Man both without me, and I'll see whether the architect survives contact with the demolition, because a great many architects don't. And if you're still standing in the spring, I'll come back and we'll have this conversation again, and next time I'll come without the cups. He inclined his head, a fraction, the exact courtesy an old power pays a new one it has decided to take seriously. You've made the war interesting, Mr. Potter. I'm old enough to be grateful for that and wise enough to be afraid of it. Good evening. He left as he had come, past Creature, who had listened at the door and now looked at his master with the naked adoration of an old servant who has watched the House of Black's newest lord decline, what the house's oldest lords would have crawled to accept. Harry stood alone in the drawing room with two cups on the table, one drunk and one full, and he did not drink the full one, and he did not pour it out, and he left it standing there as a reminder, because he had learned this week that the surest way to lose to men like Selwyn was to start believing you had won. Hermione came on Saturday, and she came the honest way by the front door, having written first, which was so unlike the week's other visitors that it disarmed him more thoroughly than any of Selwyn's cups. She stood in the hall of Grimmauld Place with her arms crossed over a jumper he recognized from 3 summers ago, and she looked at him, and she did not run to embrace him because she had read enough of the Prophet and heard enough from Lupin to arrive frightened, and she was too honest to hide it behind a hug. "You revoked Dumbledore's proxy in open session," she said. "You claimed a founder's chair. You told Remus to send you meeting requests through a solicitor. You met with Arcturus Selwyn, whose family has been on the wrong side of every dark rising since the statute, and you let him into Sirius's house." She had counted it out on her fingers, the litany, the case for the prosecution, and Harry understood that she had spent the whole train ride assembling it because assembling things was how Hermione loved people, by refusing to look away from them. "I've known you since we were 11. So I'm going to ask you the thing everyone else is too scared to ask, and you're going to answer me because if you lie to me I'll know, and if you tell me the truth I might be the only person left who'll still tell you when you're wrong. Harry, are you becoming him?" He did not pretend to misunderstand which him she meant. "No," he said, "but I understand why you had to ask, and I'd think less of you if you hadn't." He led her into the drawing room past the 2 cups he had not cleared away, and she looked at them and worked out what they were and said nothing, which was its own kind of intelligence. "Sit. I'll tell you the truth, and you're not going to like all of it, and I need you to stay in the room while I tell it anyway, because you're right that you might be the only one who'll tell me when I'm wrong, and a man building what I'm building without a single person willing to do that becomes exactly the thing you're afraid of. I know that, it's the whole reason I let you in the door." She sat on the edge of the chair, not committing her weight to the room. "Then tell me." So he told her, not the reliquary, not yet, not the Founder's Book or the thing that had come apart in the greenlit dark. Those were weapons, and she was not ready to be trusted with weapons she had not decided to hold. But the shape of it, the trust drained from his vault to pay for his own cage, the prophecy withheld until it could only wound. The plan 15 years long to raise a weapon grateful and poor and ready to die at the useful moment. He watched it land and he watched her fight it, because Hermione's first loyalty had always been to the institutions she believed protected the vulnerable, and Dumbledore was the largest of those institutions, and he was asking her to look at the crack running through it. "Even if all of that is true," she said, and her voice was not steady, and she made no attempt to steady it, which he respected, "the answer isn't to become a power that no one can check. That's the reasoning every tyrant in every book I've ever read used. They were wronged, so they took power so no one could wrong them again, and then they were the ones doing the wronging, and they never once noticed the moment it turned, because there is no moment. It's not a door you walk through. It's a slope, and it's gentle, and you're already on it, and you're clever enough to build a justification for every single step, which makes you more dangerous than Selwyn, not less." "I know," Harry said, and the simple agreement stopped her because she had braced for an argument. "You're right. There's no door, only a slope, and I'm on it, and I'm clever enough to justify every step." "That's not a reason to get off the slope, Hermione, because there is no getting off it. The people who refuse the slope entirely just hand the summit to whoever has fewer scruples, and then you get a Voldemort or a ministry, which is only a Voldemort that files paperwork. The question isn't whether I'm on the slope. Everyone with power is on the slope. The question is whether I've built something that can pull me back up it when I start to slide. And I have, and it's you, and it's Luna, and it's a Greengrass girl who told me to my face I sound exactly like the Dark Lord, and it's the fact that I keep the people who'll say that where I can hear them instead of surrounding myself with the ones who won't." He crouched so that they were level. "I'm not asking you to approve of me. I'm asking you to stay close enough to stop me." Voldemort surrounded himself with people who were incapable of telling him no. That's the actual difference between us, and it's the only one that matters, and it only works if the people who can tell me no refuse to leave the room. So don't leave the room, that's the whole ask. Hate what I'm doing, say so, just do it from in here. Hermione looked at him for a long time, and the argument she had brought lay between them defeated, not because he had beaten it, but because he had agreed with it and kept going, which was harder to answer than any denial. "This is a trap," she said finally, unsteadily, "asking me to be your conscience, because now if I leave I'm abandoning the one job that might keep you human, and you know I won't do that, and you know it, and you did it anyway." "Yes," Harry said, "I did. Because it's true, and because I'd rather trap you into saving me than lie to you into approving of me. You can decide which of those is worse. You'll be honest about it, that's why I need you," she stayed. She did not forgive him, and she did not agree, and she did not touch the tea creature brought, and she stayed, and it was, Harry thought as she argued with him into the evening, the most valuable thing that had happened to him all week, worth more than the Founder's chair because a chair could not tell him when he was wrong. He had planned one more move before the week was out, and it was the quietest, and it would prove the loudest. The Prophet would not print the truth about Wednesday. He had known it would not. The Prophet printed the Ministry's truth, and the Ministry's truth was that a troublesome young man had made an irregular claim that the Chief Warlock's office was reviewing. 3 lines on page 9. Harry had not expected otherwise, and had not intended to fight the Prophet on its own ground, which was a losing game every enemy of the Ministry had ever played and lost. Instead he went to the Quibbler. Xenophilius Lovegood received him in a house shaped like a rook, all vertical, cluttered with the paraphernalia of a man who believed impossible things on principle. And Luna was there, pale and unsurprised, with the look of someone who had been expecting Harry for some days, which, knowing Luna, she probably had. She looked at his forehead where the scar was, and looked longer than was polite, and said, "Oh, it's quiet now. The thing that was shouting in there has stopped." And Harry, who had told no one what had happened in the reliquary, understood that Luna Lovegood had noticed the eviction of a piece of Voldemort's soul from across a cluttered room, and made a note in the ledger that Luna was worth more than the whole of the Order put together and had been overlooked by everyone for exactly the reasons that made her valuable. "I have a story for your father," Harry said. "It's true, which I understand is unusual for this paper, and it's going to sound madder than anything he's ever printed, which is why he's the only man in Britain who can print it. The heir of Slytherin isn't the Dark Lord, it never was. The founder chose someone else, and the choosing happened in the Wisengamot on Wednesday in front of 50 witnesses, and the prophet buried it on page 9 because the truth is inconvenient to everyone who currently holds power. I want it on your front page." Photographs of the founder's chair standing empty for 1,000 years and then not empty. The charter clause printed in full, and the question asked plainly that the prophet will never ask: if the Dark Lord isn't the heir of Slytherin, then what exactly has everyone been dying for? Xenophilius Lovegood looked at him with wide protuberant eyes, and Luna smiled at nothing, and Harry laid the founder's charter on the cluttered table, and the campaign, which had begun with a question planted in 50 minds, took its next shape, which was a question planted in 100,000. Luna walked him to the crooked door. The evening had come down over the hills, and the printing press 2 floors below had already begun to thump, Xenophilius feeding the founder's charter into it line by line, and the sound came up through the rook-shaped house like a slow, enormous pulse. "You'll frighten a great many people on Tuesday," Luna said, not unkindly, watching a moth batter itself against the lit window. "The ones who were sure, being sure is the warmest place in the world, and you're about to open all the windows." She turned her pale eyes on him. "They'll hate you for the cold before they thank you for the air, you know that." "I'm counting on the first part," Harry said. "I'll settle for the second whenever it arrives." He went out into the dark and did not apparate, because a man who meant to remake a country ought to walk through it now and again and smell what he was remaking. Somewhere behind him the press thumped on, printing the one question the whole edifice had been built to keep unasked, and it would be on 10,000 kitchen tables before the milk. And Harry Potter walked home under a sky going to iron and did not once look back at the light in the rook-shaped window, because the thing was set in motion now, and things set in motion did not require him to watch them fall. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Two Serpents. The Dark Lord read The Quibbler by candlelight, which was itself a humiliation, and he understood that it was, and he read it anyway. He had not felt the thing go until it was already gone. 15 years he had carried the awareness of the fragment in Potter without knowing what it was, a warmth at the edge of his attention, a tether he had mistaken for the ordinary residue of a curse gone wrong. He had used it. Twice he had reached down that tether into Potter's sleeping mind and made him dream. And then on an evening in the summer, without warning, the warmth had gone cold and the tether had gone slack, and something at the western edge of the country had opened and closed like a great stone mouth, and Lord Voldemort, who had arranged his entire existence around the proposition that he could not die, had felt, for the length of a single breath, the floor of that arrangement shift beneath him. He had told himself it was nothing. He had told himself Potter had strengthened his mind, that Dumbledore had at last taught the child to close the door, that the tether had been severed by ordinary occlumency and no more. He had told himself this for 6 weeks, and he had almost believed it, and now a lunatic's newspaper lay open on the table before him, printing photographs of a chair that had stood empty for 1,000 years and did not stand empty any longer, and under the photographs a question he could not answer, and beside the question a name. "The heir of Slytherin is not the Dark Lord." He read it 4 times. Bellatrix knelt at the edge of the candlelight, vibrating with the need to be told it was a lie, to be sent to kill whoever had printed it. And he did not look at her, because if he looked at her she would see the thing moving behind his face, and he had spent 70 years ensuring that no living creature ever saw that thing. It was not possible. That was his first and last defense, and it was a good one because it was nearly true. He was the last living descendant of Salazar Slytherin. He had traced the line himself, through the squalid gaunts, through the ring and the shack and the murdered muggle, back to the founder whose name he had taken as a birthright when the name he had been given proved to belong to the father who abandoned him. He had opened the chamber, the basilisk had known him, the magic of the deep places had answered his tongue, he was the heir. The parchment of his own blood said so. It was not possible that a half-blood orphan raised by muggles, a boy who had survived him by an accident of a mother's love and nothing more, could be what 1,000 years of pure descent had produced in him. And yet the tether had gone cold. And yet the chair had lifted its drape. And yet in the deepest and most carefully sealed chamber of himself, in the place he did not visit because visiting it required admitting it existed, a small cold voice that had been his companion since he was an unloved child in a London orphanage asked the question the newspaper had asked, and asked it in his own boyhood voice which he had spent a lifetime trying to strangle. What if you were never chosen at all? He had built everything on the certainty of the choosing. It was the foundation stone beneath the foundation stones. Tom Riddle had been nobody, a charity case in a wool blanket, a name shared with a father who had walked out and a grandfather who had spat when he heard it. And then at 11, a man had come to the orphanage and told him he was special, that he was a wizard, that he came from a line. And Tom Riddle had taken that single sentence and grown an empire out of it, because to be chosen was the one thing the orphanage had taught him he was not, and he had needed it more than air, more than the immortality he later chased, more than the power he took. Every wand he had ever raised had been raised at the bottom of it to make the choosing true. To force the world to agree that the discarded boy had been, all along, the heir of something. And now a newspaper printed by a madman was telling 100,000 readers that the choosing had gone to someone else, that the founder's own stone had lit for a Potter and stayed dark for him. And the small cold voice in the sealed chamber would not stop repeating it because the voice had always known, the voice had been there in the orphanage, the voice remembered being nobody and had never once believed the Empire had cured it. He rose, the candle guttered. He rose, the candle guttered. Bellatrix flinched upward, hungry. "My lord, Potter has claimed something," Voldemort said, and his voice was very soft, which those who survived him had learned to fear more than his shouting. "A trick, a stage thing, an old fool's charade dressed in charter law to unsettle our people. Dumbledore's work. The man has always understood that a symbol wounds where a curse cannot." He believed perhaps half of this as he said it, and the half he did not believe he buried. "But a symbol that is allowed to stand becomes a truth, so it will not be allowed to stand. We will remind the country before this lie can take root who the heir of Slytherin is, and we will remind them in the language the country actually understands, which is not charter law and is not a lunatic's photographs." He turned, and the candlelight found the red of his eyes. "Fear. We will write the answer in the only ink that lasts. Assemble them, Bella. I have a village in mind." She went to it with the joy of a hound unleashed, and Lord Voldemort stood alone in the guttering dark, master of the greatest terror the country had known in a century, and did not permit himself to notice that he had chosen fear precisely because he had for once in 70 years met a question he could not out-argue, and fear was the only answer he had ever fully trusted, because fear had been the first magic he ever worked on the other children in the dark when he had nothing else. So he did with this question what he had always done with such questions, which was to bury it under bodies until the ground went quiet. The village was called Little Hangleton's neighbor in the record books, and nothing at all in the minds of the people who lived there. A muggle place with 24 wizarding families salted through it, chosen because it was defenseless and because it was near the graves of the family that had thrown him away. Voldemort appreciated the symmetry. He always had. They came down out of a moonless sky at the hour when even the wary sleep, 20 of them in the masks, and the first house was burning before the first scream. And this was the method, this was the whole art of it, speed and noise, and the removal of the possibility of resistance before resistance could organize itself into hope. Terror was an engineering problem, and Lord Voldemort was its master engineer. You did not fight a village. You demonstrated to a village that fighting was a category error, that they were not opponents but material, and you did it fast enough that the lesson reached the next village and the next before dawn. Harry Potter arrived between the 4th house and the 5th. He did not arrive with an army because he did not have one yet, and he did not arrive shouting because shouting was Voldemort's instrument, and he had no intention of borrowing his enemy's tools. He arrived alone on the Founder's magic, stepping out of a fold in the air that no ministry tracker would ever find, and he arrived having spent the flight doing arithmetic, because even now, with a village burning, he did not stop counting. 20 Death Eaters, perhaps 40 souls still living in the houses that had not yet caught. Bellatrix somewhere at the center, because she always was. And one thing the raiders did not know, which was that the Founder's heir had read the Founder's book cover to cover in the weeks since the reliquary, and that the book had a great deal to say about the working of fear, because the Founder had understood fear too, and had understood, as his corrupted descendant never would, that the deepest magic was not the causing of it but the taking of it away. The 5th house had a family in it. Harry could hear the children through the wall. He put his hand flat against the burning door and spoke the Founder's word for threshold, and the fire went out of the wood and into his palm, and out of his palm into the ground, and the door stood cold and whole, and inside a woman with 2 children pressed into her sides looked up at the figure in the doorway with the ancient terror of prey that has run out of places to run. "The cellar," Harry said. "Now, it'll hold, I've sealed it, don't come up until the noise stops." He did not wait to be thanked or doubted. He had already turned back to the street, and behind him he heard the cellar door, and he let out a breath he had not known he was holding, and that was the one thing he permitted himself, and then he stopped permitting himself things because the work required both hands. 2 of the masks came around the corner of the burning house, wands up, and saw a lone figure in the firelight, and did what raiders do to lone figures, which was laugh. They should not have laughed. Harry did not raise a wand because the Founder's magic did not require the mouth or the wand the way school magic did. It required only the will, and his will in that moment was a very cold and very specific thing. The cobbles of the street woke beneath the 2 raiders. Stone that had lain dead and paved for a century remembered at the Founder's word that it had once been living rock in the bones of a hill, and it rose and it closed around the raiders' legs to the knee, gentle as setting concrete and about as negotiable, and the 2 men in the masks went from predators to statues in the space of a held breath, wands still up, curses dying unspoken on their tongues, and Harry walked past them without hurrying and did not kill them. Because killing them was what the masks expected and what Voldemort wanted and what Hermione was watching for, and he had promised himself and her that he would be not him in public repeatedly until the pattern could not be denied. Deeper in, 4 of the masks had cornered an old man against the churchyard wall and were taking their time, because the taking of time was the point, terror being a thing you cultivated slowly in front of an audience of the soon-to-be terrorized. One of them had his wand raised for the curse that peels the mind, and the old man had stopped begging, which meant he had reached the place past begging, and the four laughed the way the two at the corner had laughed, because a man against a wall is a comedy to men who have decided he is not a man. Harry did not shout a warning. Warnings were for enemies you respected. He spoke instead to the churchyard itself, to the yew that had stood in that ground since before the church, and the yew heard the founder's tongue and remembered that it had roots, and the roots came up out of the consecrated earth in a slow black lattice and took the four raiders by the ankles and the wrists and lifted them off their feet and held them there, spread against the night, wands fallen, the curse dying half-spoken in a mouth that could no longer reach its wand. It was done without violence, and it was the most violent thing in the village, because there is nothing a cruel man fears more than being made gentle by a power he cannot argue with, hung up harmless in the dark while his intended victim walks away untouched. The old man slid down the wall. Harry crouched by him, and the man's eyes were the eyes of someone who has seen the shape of his own ending and been handed back the rest of his life without warning and did not yet know how to hold it. "Can you walk?" Harry asked. The old man nodded, not sure it was true. "Then walk to the church. The stone's older than they are. I've woken it. Nothing in a mask will cross the threshold tonight. Take anyone you find on the way." He rose. Behind him the yew held its four ornaments against the sky, and the churchyard breathed out the last of a fear that had never belonged in it, and the old man went half-crawling toward a door that had begun faintly to glow with the founder's gold. He walked into the center of the village, and the founder's magic walked with him, and the raiders learned, house by house, that the thing that had come for them did not fight the way wizards fought. It did not trade curses. It unmade the ground they stood on and the air they breathed and the fear they had brought. Where a Death Eater raised a wand, the wand grew heavy as a bar of lead and dragged his arm down. Where a mask turned to run, the shadow of the burning house reached out and held him by his own shadow, pinned to the cobbles by the dark he had made. Harry moved through the village like a slow tide coming in, and the fire went out ahead of him and the screaming stopped behind him, and the 20 raiders who had come to write an answer in the only ink that last found themselves, one after another, rooted and disarmed and alive, which was the most frightening thing of all, because alive meant witnesses. And witnesses meant that by morning the country would know that the Dark Lord had sent 20 of his best to a village, and that a single young man had walked in and taken them apart without raising his voice or ending a life. Bellatrix found him in the square. She came at him as she came at everything all at once, with the killing curse already leaving her wand, green light tearing across the firelit dark, and Harry did the thing the Founder's book had promised could be done and that no wizard in 3 centuries had been fit to do. He did not dodge and he did not shield, because there is no shield against that particular green. He reached out with the Founder's will and he took the curse's tether. Every curse has a thread running back to the one who cast it, the book had said, for a curse is a piece of the caster's intent given flight, and a piece of a thing remembers its whole. Harry caught the thread of Bellatrix Lestrange's hatred as it flew, and he did not turn the curse back on her because that too was what she expected, and he had grown tired of doing what his enemies expected. He grounded it. As he had grounded the fire and the fear, he took the green light and its freight of murder and he ran it down through himself into the deep rock under the village, the way a rod runs lightning into the earth, and the killing curse went into the bones of the hill and was gone, and Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the square with her wand spent and her mouth open on a scream she had not decided to make, staring at a boy who had swallowed the unblockable curse and stood there unhurt. Looking at her with the flat, cold attention of a man pricing a horse he does not intend to buy. "You," she said, her wand shook. "That's not the Dark Lord is the heir, the Dark Lord, not you, never you." "I know you need that to be true," Harry said, and there was no cruelty in it, which was the cruelest thing he could have done to her because Bellatrix Lestrange had organized her entire soul around a devotion, and devotion cannot survive pity. "You've given him everything, your marriage, your mine. 14 years in Azkaban, you'd give him your life tonight and count it cheap. And the thing you gave it all to isn't what he told you he was. That's not your fault. He's very good at being believed. But the Founder chose me in front of the whole Wisengamot, and the stone lit up for me and stayed dark for him, and no amount of what you've sacrificed can change a fact that was true before you were born." He stepped closer and she stepped back, which neither of them had expected. "Go home, Bella. Tell him what you saw. Tell him a village burned and one boy put it out and took 20 of your people alive. And tell him the stone still won't light for him, and watch his face when you do, and then ask yourself on the long walk back what exactly you burned your one life for." She fled. She was the last to flee, and she fled, and Harry let her, because she was worth more to him carrying that message than she was worth dead, and because a witness who has been shown mercy she cannot explain is a seed of doubt planted in the very center of the enemy's house. He spent the rest of the night giving the village back to itself. He unrooted the survivors from the cellars and the wardrobes. He did not unroot the raiders, those he left in the stone for the Aurors, who arrived an hour too late as they always did, and found 20 of the most wanted terrorists in Britain set in the cobbles like fence posts, disarmed, alive, and gibbering, and found no sign at all of whoever had done it, because Harry Potter had gone before the first Auror crossed the parish line, having learned that the most powerful position in any story is the one just off the edge of the page. He took one raider with him. Not a rooted one, A younger man he had recognized under the mask, a boy really no older than 19 who had thrown up in an alley at the site of the first burning house and had been trying, when Harry found him, to help a muggle child instead of hurting her, and had been about to be killed by his own side for it. Harry had taken him out of the village in the same fold of air he had come by, and now the young man sat in a warded room in Grimmauld Place, green about the face, and told Harry Potter everything because Harry had not needed to hurt him, because the Founder's Minecraft did not pry the way Snape's legilimency pried. It opened a door and made staying on the far side of it feel like the more frightening choice. "He's afraid," the young man said of the Dark Lord wonderingly, as though the word had never occurred to him before, and now that it had, it explained everything. "That's the thing no one's allowed to see. He does the fear to everyone else so no one looks close enough to see he's made of it. My father says the Dark Lord conquered death, but you don't spend 70 years running from a thing you've conquered. He's still running. Whatever he did to himself to not die, it didn't work, not as he tells it, because a man who wasn't afraid anymore wouldn't need us to be." He looked up at Harry, and the doubt Harry had planted in Bellatrix's heart he watched take root in this one's face in real time. "What did he do to himself to not die?" "He tore his soul apart," Harry said, "and hid the pieces, and he thinks that makes him safe, and it makes him the opposite of safe because a thing in pieces can be gathered." He was not speaking to the young man now, not entirely. "I have one of the pieces as it happens. I've had it in my house all along and never knew. I'm going to go and destroy it tonight, and he'll feel it when it goes, the way I felt the last one go, and he'll spend the rest of his short existence learning what it means to be gathered." The young man was quiet for a moment, working something out, and then he asked the question Harry had been waiting for, the one that meant the doubt had finished putting down its roots. "What happens to me now?" "That depends on you," Harry said. "You tried to help a child instead of hurting her, and your own side was going to kill you for it, which tells you everything you need to know about the cause you signed up to. You can go home and hide and hope it's over. Or you can be the first of them to choose the other thing in the open and tell the truth about what you saw tonight, and give the one still wearing the mask a door to walk out of that isn't a grave. There'll be more like you. There always are once the fear cracks. I'd rather build the door than dig the graves." He held the younger man's eyes. "But that's your choice, not mine. I don't conscript. He does. That's another difference you might think about." The village did the work he had built it to do, and it did it faster than even he had predicted, because the prophet, for once, could not bury the story. 20 rooted Death Eaters in a village square were not a page 9 item. 40 saved families were not a rumor the ministry could deny. The prophet tried for one addition to award the rescue to a swift Aura response, and the Quibbler ran the survivors' own accounts side by side with the ministry's version. A woman from the fifth house describing the cold hand that put out the fire on her door, an old man describing the black roots that had lifted his killers off their feet, and the country read both and drew the obvious conclusion, and the conclusion had a name, and the name was not the ministry's. Hermione came to Grimmauld Place with both papers and spread them on the table where the 2 teacups still stood. "You let Bellatrix Lestrange go," she said. It was not quite an accusation. She had learned over the weeks to gather her evidence before she ruled on it. "You had her disarmed and you let her walk out. She's killed dozens of people, Harry. She killed Sirius." "I know what she did," Harry said. "I stood in the room while she did it." He did not raise his voice, and the flatness of it told her more than volume would have. "And if I'd killed her in that square in front of witnesses, the story this morning would be about a boy who murders disarmed prisoners, and every frightened person in the country would file me next to Voldemort in the drawer marked dangerous, and they'd be right to. I need her alive, and I need her broken, not dead and martyred. She's carrying a doubt back to his own house that's worth more than her corpse." "That's not mercy, Hermione. Don't make me into something I'm not. It's arithmetic. But it happens to look exactly like mercy from the outside, and looking like mercy while doing arithmetic is the entire discipline I'm trying to learn, and you're the one who's going to tell me the day I stop being able to tell the two apart." Hermione looked at him for a moment. "That day," she said, "when you can't tell the difference between mercy and the appearance of mercy. How will I know? How will you?" "You'll know because I'll stop letting the Bellatrixes go," Harry said. "It's a testable thing, that's why I told it to you and not to a mirror. Watch the pattern. The day the arithmetic and the mercy come apart, I'll do the profitable cruel thing instead of the profitable kind one, and you'll see it and you'll say so, and I'm trusting you to say so even if by then I've made myself very hard to say it to." He met her eyes. "I built you into the plan, remember. You're not a bystander to this. You're a load-bearing wall. It's not a comfortable thing to be. I'm sorry for it. I'd be sorrier to do it without you." Daphne Greengrass sent word the same week, and the word was brief, and it was the most important sentence anyone had sent him since Nagnok's first letter. "My father read the survivors' accounts," it said, "and then he read the prophets, and then he poured no brandy at all, which is how you will know he has stopped being afraid of you and started being afraid of being on the wrong side of you. The 40 families are watching a third thing now. Some of them are ready to stop watching. When you are ready to receive them at Grimmauld Place in the open under the name of the House of Black, because a thing done in a famous old house in daylight is an alliance, and a thing done in a rented room at night is a conspiracy, and you are not, whatever the prophet prints, a conspiracy." She had not signed it. She had not needed to. Creature had wept when Harry finally asked the right question, which was not what happened to Regulus, but what did Regulus die trying to do? The whole story came out of the old elf in a flood he had been holding for 18 years. The young Master Regulus, who had joined the Dark Lord and then learned something that broke him. The Dark Lord borrowing creature for an errand and leaving him to die in a cave of poison and drown dead. Regulus discovering it and going back to the cave in secret with creature and drinking the poison himself so that creature could take the locket. And the last order, the one that had shaped the elf's entire ruined life, to destroy the thing and tell no one. And the elf's failure, 18 years of failure, because the locket could not be destroyed by any magic creature had. And it had sat in a cabinet in the drawing room whispering its filth into the walls of the house while a broken elf tried and could not obey the last wish of the only master who had ever been kind to him. "Bring it to me," Harry said, and his voice had gone very gentle because there are moments that require gentleness the way a wound requires a clean edge. "And I'll finish what Regulus started. You didn't fail him, creature. You kept it safe for 18 years until someone came who could do the last part. That's not failure. That's the longest and most faithful keeping I've ever heard of. Regulus would be proud of you. I'm telling you that as the head of his house, which gives me the right to say what he'd feel, and he'd be proud." The elf brought the locket, cradled in both hands as though it might wake, and laid it on the drawing-room table, and Harry looked at Salazar Slytherin's locket, the founder's own relic, gold gone dark, the serpentess set in green stones, and he felt the thing inside it feel him. The Horcrux knew him. It knew what he was. And where the diary had tried to charm and the ring he would learn had tried to tempt, the locket did the thing that fragments of that particular soul did best, which was to reach for the fear at the bottom of the one who threatened it. It opened on its own, and out of it came a voice made of every cruelty the country had ever done him. It showed him the cupboard under the stairs. It showed him Sirius going through the veil. It showed him a version of himself grown monstrous, crowned and cold and utterly alone, every friend fled or dead, Hermione's chair in his drawing room empty, and it said in the high cold voice that had lived in his own head for 15 years before he evicted it, "This is what you become, we both know it, you're already halfway, the only difference between you and my master is that he stopped lying to himself about it." "No," Harry said, and he did not shout, and he laid his hand on the open locket. And the founder's magic came up through him, and he did to the fragment what he had done to the fragment in himself, which was worse than destruction. He did not burn it. He made himself for the length of a breath, so completely and coldly and finally his own, so wholly the architect and not the wound, that the fragment's entire argument, the whole seductive thesis that Harry was already becoming Voldemort, was revealed in the light of the founder's magic to be simply factually false, and a lie cannot survive being held up to the thing it lies about. The fragment screamed. It screamed in the high cold voice, and then in a younger voice, the voice of an unloved child in an orphanage, and then it came apart and the green stones cracked and the gold ran like water and Slytherin's locket lay on the table in empty ruin with the founder's serpent still faintly gleaming in the wreck, cleansed at last of the thing that had squatted in it. The drawing room seemed larger for its absence. Creature had crept to the edge of the table while it happened, and now he reached out one shaking hand and touched the ruined gold and made a sound that was 18 years long. Harry let him have the moment. He understood, watching the old elf weep over a melted locket, that he had done two things at once with a single working, which was the founder's whole art. He had torn a piece out of the Dark Lord, and he had ended a servant's ruin, and the second was not incidental to the first. A ruler who could only destroy was a Voldemort. A ruler who destroyed the right thing and mended something in the same motion was the other kind, the kind the world had never been governed by, the kind Harry had walked out of the sea intending to become. He did not throw the ruined locket away. He lifted it from the table, the founder's serpentess still catching the firelight in the wreck of the gold, and he closed his hand around it, and he felt the founder's magic acknowledge it the way it had acknowledged him on the causeway, warm, patient, glad. This was a relic of Salazar Slytherin, made by the founder's own hand 1,000 years before Tom Riddle defiled it, and Riddle's filth was gone out of it now, and what remained was older and cleaner and belonged, by the only law that mattered down in the deep places, to the heir who had freed it. Harry would carry it, not as a trophy, as a correction. Every enemy who saw it on him would understand, without a word, that the founder's things were coming home one at a time to the founder's true heir, and that the man who had stolen the name was being unmade in the most humiliating way a thief can be unmade, which is to watch the rightful owner walk in and quietly reclaim what was taken. Far away, in a guttering dark, Lord Voldemort came out of his chair with a sound he had not made since he was a living man, his hand going to his chest, to a place where something had just been torn out of him, the second such tearing in a summer, and this time he could not tell himself it was nothing, because this time he knew exactly what had gone, and he knew that only one person alive could have found it, and he understood at last fully in the cold sweat of the small hours. That the question in the lunatic's newspaper had not been a symbol or a charade or an old man's trick, it had been true. And the truth was coming for him, one gathered piece at a time. They met 3 weeks later, and it was Harry who arranged it, which told Voldemort more than the meeting itself. The founder's heir sent no army and no threat. He sent a locket, the ruined one, by an owl that could not be traced, with no note, because the ruin was the note. And then he let it be known through the Grey families, through the channels Selwyn had shown him existed, that he would speak with the Dark Lord once on neutral ground, under the old parley law that predated them both and that even Voldemort would not break, because breaking parley law was the one thing that would turn the whole neutral country against him overnight. And Voldemort still needed the neutral country, and Harry knew it. They stood in a ruined chapel on a moor with the parley stones burning cold blue at the four corners, and for a long moment the two heirs of Salazar Slytherin looked at each other across 1,000 years of a legacy that only one of them had ever truly held. "You've been busy, Harry Potter," Voldemort said. The red eyes moved over him, reading and finding, Harry knew. None of the tells the Dark Lord had spent a lifetime learning to read. "A village saved, my servants shamed. A relic of mine returned to me in pieces. You want me to believe the newspaper, you want the whole country to believe it, and you've come here under parley to what? Gloat, recruit me, warn me." The lipless mouth moved. "Kill me, you cannot kill me. Better wizards than you have tried. I have seen to it that I cannot die." "You've seen to it that you can't stop dying," Harry said. "There's a difference, and you've never understood it, and it's the whole reason we're standing here." The red eyes narrowed, and then the Dark Lord did the thing Harry had known he would do, because a frightened man who cannot win by threat will always try to win by seduction, and Voldemort had seduced cleverer men than most. His voice changed. It went low and reasonable, the voice that had turned schoolboys into murderers and ministers into cowards, the finest instrument he owned. "Then let us stop pretending to be enemies," Voldemort said. "When we are the only two men alive who are the same, you feel it. I felt it in you for 15 years down that tether, the coldness, the appetite, the clarity that the rest of them mistake for cruelty because they are too small to recognize sovereignty when it looks at them. They fear you already. The greengrass girl who priced you like a horse, the old man rereading his letters. They will never love you, Harry, because you are too far above them to be loved, only feared, and a man who is only feared is very lonely, and I am the one being in the world who is not too small to stand beside you. Two heirs, the legacy whole again. We need not fight over a country we could simply divide. That is not a threat. It is the only friendship either of us will ever be offered." It was, Harry understood, a genuinely good offer in the sense that it was aimed with precision at the exact wound Voldemort had spent 15 years learning the shape of. It would have worked on a Harry who had not gone down into the Founder's dark and looked at the bottom of himself and come back knowing what he was. "You felt the coldness in me and mistook it for kinship," Harry said. "That was your last real mistake, and everything since has been the interest on it. The coldness isn't the same thing in the two of us, Tom. In you it's a wound. You went cold because feeling was unbearable and you couldn't survive it, so you killed it, and you've been dead inside ever since and calling the deadness strength. Mine isn't a wound, mine's a choice. I can feel all of it. I felt Sirius go through that veil and I feel it now and I'll feel it every day I'm alive, and I've simply decided not to let the feeling steer my hand, which is a thing you cannot do because you can't decide about a thing you've cut out. You're not offering me friendship. You're offering me your disease and calling it a cure. And the loneliness you think you can end, I'm not lonely. I have a muggle-born girl in my drawing room who tells me I'm wrong to my face and 40 families deciding to trust me in daylight. You have Bellatrix, who worships a man who doesn't exist, and 19 others in the cobbles of a village learning they were lied to. Between the two of us, Tom, I am not the one who is alone. I know exactly what you did to see to it," Harry said. "That's why I'm here, not to gloat and not to recruit you, because you're not recruitable. You'd have to admit you were wrong about the one thing you've built your whole self on, and you'd sooner burn the world. And not to kill you tonight because it's parley and I keep the old laws, which is a difference between us you should think about. I came to tell you why you're going to lose, because no one has ever told you the truth to your face, and you've earned it, and it will hurt you more than any curse I could throw." Harry stepped forward into the cold blue light. "You didn't tear your soul apart to escape death, you told yourself that. You tore it apart because you have been afraid every single day since you were a child no one wanted, and immortality was never the goal. The goal was to never again be the small frightened thing in the orphanage, the one no one chose, and it didn't work. It made you more afraid because now you had 7 times as much to lose. You are the most frightened man in Britain, and you spent 70 years making everyone else more frightened so that no one would look at you closely enough to see it." I looked. "Founder's magic let me look. And do you know what's at the bottom of the great Lord Voldemort under all the terror you sell?" He let it land. "A boy who was never chosen, who couldn't bear it and built an empire of fear to keep from feeling it, and is going to die feeling it anyway because I am going to gather every piece of you, and when the last one goes you will be exactly what you were at the beginning, small, alone, and unchosen. The stone will never light for you, Tom. It never once did. You just never had the courage to ask it the question because you already knew the answer, and you've spent your whole life killing people so you'd never have to hear it said aloud." The chapel was silent but for the cold blue burning of the parley stones. And Lord Voldemort, who had not been afraid where anyone could see it in 50 years, stood in the ruin on the moor and looked at the Founder's true heir, and something moved across the ruined face that no Death Eater had ever witnessed and lived to describe, and he understood that he was not looking at a rival or a symbol or an old man's weapon. He was looking at the one thing his entire architecture of fear had been built to keep from his door, which was someone who had looked into the dark he came from, and gone all the way to the bottom of it and come back up unafraid, and there is no curse in any book for that, and he knew it. And for once in his long, unnatural existence, the Dark Lord wanted very badly to run. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The old man's gambit. The summons from Dumbledore came the way everything from Dumbledore came, wrapped in courtesy and weighted with the assumption of obedience. It was a note, not an owl order, handwritten on cream stock, inviting Mr. Potter to take tea with the headmaster at his earliest convenience at Hogwarts on a matter of some importance to them both. There was no acknowledgement in it of the revoked proxy or the Founder's chair or the village or the summer of silence between them. There was only the old warmth, offered as though it had never been withdrawn, and Harry read it and understood the strategy inside the warmth, which was to behave as if nothing had changed and thereby to make the changes feel like Harry's tantrum rather than Harry's judgment. It was a good strategy. It had worked on him for 5 years. He had aged out of it in a single summer, and Dumbledore did not yet know that, and Harry intended to let the old man discover it in person because there are lessons that only land when they are delivered face to face. He went to Hogwarts. He went openly through the front gates in the daylight in the charcoal wool because he had learned from a greengrass girl that a thing done in the open is an alliance or a reckoning, and a thing done in the dark is a conspiracy, and he was done with the dark for now. The castle rose against a sky the color of pewter, and it did the thing it had always done to him, which was to feel like the first home he had ever had, and he let himself feel it because he had promised Voldemort in the ruined chapel that he would go on feeling everything, and he kept his promises, even the ones made to enemies, especially those. But he did not let the feeling steer him. He walked up through the grounds with the ruined locket warm against his chest, and the Founder's book heavier than any book its size had a right to be. And the stone of the castle, which had been quarried in part from the Founder's own holding, knew him as he passed, and here and there along the walls a thread of pale gold woke and ran ahead of him and died, the castle greeting its Founder's heir in a language its headmaster could not read. Dumbledore was waiting in the circular office at the top of the tower among the whirring silver instruments, and he rose when Harry entered, and he smiled, and the smile was warm and it was real and it was also a tool, and Harry had learned to see both truths at once. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "thank you for coming, lemon drop." "No," Harry said, and sat without being asked in the chair across the desk, and looked at the old man he had once loved more than any living person, and took for the first time a full accounting of him. Dumbledore was dying. Harry saw it at once with the Founder's sight, which read the deep condition of a thing beneath its surface. The right hand was blackened and dead to the wrist, the corruption held back by a working of great skill and greater cost, and the corruption was not held back so much as slowed, and it was climbing. A curse. An old and terrible one, the kind that lived in objects made to kill the greedy. Harry knew without being told what object because he had spent the summer learning the architecture of Voldemort's immortality. And one of its load-bearing stones was a ring, and the ring had carried the Gaunt's crest, and Dumbledore had gone looking for the Gaunt's ring and had found it and had put it on. And Harry understood in a single cold instant that the greatest wizard of the age had been undone by the one appetite he had spent a lifetime pretending he had conquered. "You found the ring," Harry said. "You destroyed the Horcrux in it, which is more than most men could have done. And then you put it on anyway because it wasn't only a Horcrux, was it? It was something else. Something you wanted so badly that you, Albus Dumbledore, who lectured me for 5 years about the danger of wanting, slipped it onto your finger the moment the Horcrux was dead." He watched the old face. "What was on the ring that you'd die for it?" The silence in the office was very complete. The instrument's word, Fawkes shifted on his perch and made a low sound. "You have grown," Dumbledore said at last, and there was grief in it and pride, and the two were tangled past separating. "I had heard, I did not want to believe how much." He sat slowly, favoring the dead hand. "You are right, of course, about all of it. The ring carried the resurrection stone, one of the 3 deathly hallows, and I have wanted the hallows since I was younger than you are now, and I have never stopped. And I told myself when I put it on that I wished only to see certain people again, to beg forgiveness of a sister I failed. That was true. It was also a lie, or rather it was the acceptable face of a want too old and too shameful to look at directly. I have spent my life warning others against the intoxication of power because I know its taste better than any man living. That is not wisdom, Harry, it is a drunkard's caution. I have simply been afraid of myself for a very long time, and I mistook the fear for virtue, and I taught you to do the same, and I am sorry for it, more sorry than I have words remaining to spend." It was, Harry thought, the most honest thing the old man had ever said to him, and it was also, he noted, deployed with exquisite timing, an apology offered precisely when an apology would most disarm, and he held both truths again, the real remorse and the tactical remorse, and did not let the second cancel the first or the first excuse the second. "You wanted the hallows," Harry said, "the cloak, the stone, the wand, master of death." He set the words down like cards. "And the cloak has been in my family for centuries, because my family is the Peveril line, which you knew and never told me, the way you never told me anything that might have made me harder to spend. You've been sitting across a chessboard from a Peveril heir since I was 11, watching me use one of the 3 hallows as a toy to sneak into the kitchens, and you said nothing, because a Harry who knew what he was would have been a Harry you couldn't aim." He leaned forward. "That's the pattern, Albus. That's the whole pattern, and it took me a summer and a Founder's magic to see it. You don't lie, you've never once lied to me. You simply decide in advance which truths I'm allowed to have and when, and you dole them out at the moment they'll do the most work for your plan and the least good for me, and you call the withholding protection. And you've done it so long and so gently that you've stopped being able to tell the difference between managing a person and loving them." "There is no difference," Dumbledore said very quietly, "that I have ever been able to find. I have loved by managing my whole life. I did not know another way. I learned love late and badly from the wreck of the people I destroyed with it when I was young, and I decided after that the safest love was the kind that arranged the beloved's life from a careful distance and never asked and never risked and never ever let itself be swept away again." His blue eyes were wet and unashamed of it. "You have every right to the anger, Harry. I only ask that you understand it was never contempt. I did not spend you because I valued you little. I spent you because I valued the world, and I had decided long before you were born that a man who loves the world must be willing to spend even the things he loves most to save it. And I have hated myself for that decision every day of your life, and I made it again every morning because I could not see another way, and I still cannot, and now I am dying, and I find I am glad because it means I will not have to make it one more time. Harry sat with that. It was a real answer and a devastating one, and it did not change a single thing he had come to do, and the not changing was the measure of how far he had traveled. Here's what you got wrong, Harry said. Not the arithmetic. The arithmetic was sound. One life against a whole world. You spend the life, of course you do, any general would. You got wrong the thing underneath the arithmetic, which is the belief that the world is a fixed board and the only question is which pieces to sacrifice on it. That's Grindelwald's belief, Albus. That's the belief the two of you built your whole summer of youth on, the summer you don't talk about, for the greater good. A world of fixed rules and a caste of the wise who are permitted to break them on everyone else's behalf because they can see the shape of the good and the ordinary people can't. Grindelwald built an army on it. You built a smaller, gentler, more English version and called it an order and spent 40 years spending people for the greater good exactly as he did, only with regret instead of relish, and you've never once noticed that regret and relish produce the same corpses. He held the old man's eyes and did not soften it. You and Voldemort and Grindelwald are the same species. You're the three great supremacists of the age. He thinks the pure-blooded should rule. Grindelwald thought wizards should rule muggles. You think the wise should rule everyone gently without asking for their own good. And I've been down into the Founder's Dark and looked at what supremacy costs, every flavor of it, and I've come back to tell all three of you the same thing, and you're the only one wise enough to hear it. No one gets to rule anyone for their own good, not him, not Grindelwald, not you, not even me. That's the whole of what I learned, and it's the one lesson you never taught me because you never learned it yourself. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice had changed, gone quieter and older, and stripped at last of the twinkle and the tool. And what, he said, will you build that is not also a throne? You speak beautifully against rule, Harry, and you hold 4 seats and a founder's chair and the loyalty of the neutral families and a power older than the ministry, and you have unmade a piece of Voldemort's soul, and you intend to unmake the rest, and then you will stand alone at the top of a broken country with no one able to check you. That is a throne. You may hate the word. You will sit in the thing regardless. So I will ask you the question I should have asked myself at your age and did not, and destroyed my sister for lack of asking. When you have the power to rule everyone for their own good and you are certain, as you are certain now, that your good is the true good, what will stop you from becoming the 4th great supremacist of the age? What is your check, Harry? Because I was clever and I had regret and neither was enough, and you are cleverer than I was and I have not yet seen your regret. It was the best question anyone had asked him, better than Daphne's, better than Hermione's, and Harry did not answer it quickly, because a quick answer would have proved he did not understand its weight. My check is that I've built it on the outside of me where I can't reach it, he said finally. You made your conscience internal, Albus. Your own regret, your own wisdom, your own certainty about the good. And internal checks fail always because the self that's supposed to check the power is the same self the power is corrupting, and it rationalizes and you can't feel it happening. You said so yourself, there's no door, only a slope. So I didn't do that. I put my checks in other people and I gave them the power to stop me, and I made stopping me their explicit job. Hermione Granger, who tells me I'm wrong to my face and has my word that I'll never punish her for it. Luna Lovegood, who sees what I am and prints it. A Greengrass girl who priced me like a horse and will price me again the day I overreach. 40 families whose alliance I need and will lose the instant I become the thing they fear. I've made myself dependent on purpose on people who can and will destroy my project if I turn tyrant, and I've made that dependence structural so that I can't remove it without visibly becoming the monster and losing everything. That's the check. It's not my virtue. I don't trust my virtue. You taught me that. It's the one useful thing you taught me. It's a machine built outside my reach that makes tyranny cost me more than it's worth. You never built the machine, Albus. You just trusted yourself. And your sister is dead and Sirius is dead and you're dying with a stone on a ring you shouldn't have touched because a man's own conscience is the one guard that can always be bribed by the man it's guarding. The office was quiet. Fawkes turned his head. Somewhere far below, the ordinary life of the school went on, children and bells and the enormous indifference of the young to the fact that a world was being decided over their heads. You have answered it, Dumbledore said, and something in him let go some vast and ancient tension, the grip of a man who has held a burden so long he has forgotten it can be set down. You have answered the question that killed Ariana, 40 years too late for her and for me, but not perhaps too late for her. He looked at Harry and the look had no strategy in it at all, only an exhausted wonder. You built the machine. I am so old, Harry, and I never thought of the machine. I thought the answer had to be a better man. It never occurred to me that the answer was to stop requiring men to be better than they are, and to build the goodness into the structure instead, where it does not depend on anyone's soul remaining uncorrupted. That is either the wisest thing I have ever heard or the beginning of a tyranny so subtle it has convinced even its architect. I find at the end that I cannot tell which, and that I am going to have to trust you, which is a thing I have never done with anyone, and it is a strange feeling and not, I think, an unpleasant one. You don't have to trust me, Harry said. That's the point. You have to trust Hermione to stop me, and Luna to expose me, and the Greengrasses to abandon me, and those are safer bets than trusting my soul, and you know it, because you're a better judge of people than of yourself. Trust the machine, Albus. It's the only thing in this office that isn't dying. They talked a long time after that, and it was not the talk of a mentor and a weapon, and it was not entirely the talk of enemies either, and it was the first true conversation the two of them had ever had, and it came, as true things so often do, at the last possible moment when one of the two was already half in the dark. Dumbledore gave him the truth at the end, all of it. The prophecy entire, spoken plainly instead of dropped like a stone. The Horcruxes, the ones Dumbledore had found and the ones he had only theorized, the diary and the ring destroyed, the locket that Harry revealed with a word was destroyed also, the cup and the diadem and the snake and the last one, the one that had lived in Harry and had gone into the Founder's water on a summer evening and closed a silver instrument in this very office. Dumbledore wept when he understood that piece, wept with relief, because it meant the thing he had dreaded above all others. The thing he had raised Harry believing, that Harry himself would have to die to kill the fragment inside him, was no longer true, had been made untrue by the Founder's dark, and that the plan Dumbledore had hated himself for was void, and Harry did not have to die at all. "I raised you to walk into your own death," Dumbledore said, and his voice broke on it at last, the composure of a century failing in a single sentence. "I raised you grateful and poor and loved just enough to be brave and not enough to be reluctant, so that when the hour came you would lay down your life the way your mother laid down hers. And I told myself it was necessary, and it was necessary given what I knew, and you went into Founder's Cave and made it unnecessary, and I have never in my life been so glad to have wasted 15 years. You do not have to die, Harry, whatever else comes. You broke the one chain I could not break for you, and you broke it yourself, and you did not need me to do it, and that is the best failure of my entire life." And the Elder Wand, which lay in a drawer of the desk between them, the third Hallow, the one that had answered to Dumbledore for half a century, gave a single spark in its drawer, felt it by both of them, the wand's ancient allegiance stirring toward the Peveril heir who had walked into the room, and Dumbledore looked at the drawer and looked at Harry and understood and did not reach for it. "It knows you," the old man said. "Of course it does. You are the last of the Peverils, and it was the first of their gifts. It has been waiting for you longer than the Founder's chair. I could arrange for its allegiance to pass to you cleanly at my death, so that it never falls to Voldemort, who is even now hunting it, though he does not yet know where it sleeps." He almost smiled. "Or I could arrange for it to die with me, its power broken, its line ended, so that no one ever again wields the most dangerous wand ever made. I have spent the summer deciding which. I find I would like your counsel, which is a sentence I never expected to say to a 16-year-old, and which I offer as the first act of trusting the machine." Harry looked at the drawer where the Elder Wand slept, the wand that could not be beaten, the crown of the three Hallows, his by blood and by the wand's own waking allegiance, and he thought about power and about checks built on the outside of a man and about a slope with no door on it, and he gave the old man his counsel, and it was not the counsel of a boy who wanted a throne. "Break it," Harry said. "Not because I couldn't hold it, because I shouldn't have to prove I can. A machine that depends on me never wanting the most dangerous wand in the world is a machine with a single point of failure, and the failure is me, and I won't build my world with a wand in the vault that whispers to whoever holds it that they can't be beat. Break it, Albus, let the line end. Let the last thing you do be the destruction of a temptation instead of the passing of one. It's the answer you couldn't find at 17. Find it now. I'll help you." And he rose and came around the desk and stood beside the dying man, not as a weapon and not as an heir claiming his birthright, but as something the old wizard had never once permitted himself to have, which was a partner. And together they took the Elder Wand out of its drawer, and Harry lent the Founder's magic to Dumbledore's failing hand. And the wand that had killed and crowned and betrayed its way across 1,000 years came apart between them in a wash of white sparks that lit the office like a second dawn, and left, on the desk, nothing but ash and the faint smell of an old storm passing. Dumbledore breathed out. It was the breath of a man setting down the last of an enormous weight. "There," he said. "There, I have wanted to do that since I was 18, and I could never bear to, and it took a boy I tried to sacrifice to make it possible. The world is very strange, Harry, and I am glad at the end to have been proven a fool by someone worth being proven a fool by." He looked at his blackened hand, at the corruption that had climbed past the wrist, now patient and final. "I have perhaps a month, less. Severus knows a way to make the end quick and useful when it comes, and I will not trouble you with the details of an old man's arrangements. But I would ask one thing of you in the time I have. Let me spend it undoing what I can of the damage I did. Let me tell the Order the truth about you in my own voice while it still carries weight. Let me hand you the ones worth handing, McGonagall and the others, so that when I am gone they follow the machine and not the fear. It is the only apology I have the means to make, and I would like to make it while I can still lift a quill." Severus Snape was waiting on the spiral stair when Harry came down, and the two of them stopped, one above the other, in the cold turning dark of the tower, and looked at each other across a great deal of history that neither had chosen. Snape had come with a phial, a potion the color of tarnished silver, one of the workings that were slowing the curse in the dead hand, and he held it, and he did not go up, and he looked at Harry with the black, unreadable eyes that had frightened a generation of children, and found Harry knew none of the tales he had spent 15 years cataloging in the son of the man he hated. "You've changed," Snape said. It was not a courtesy. It was a diagnosis delivered flatly, as he delivered everything. "The headmaster hoped you would rise to the weight he laid on you. He did not expect you to walk out from under it and pick up a heavier one on purpose. Neither did I." The thin mouth moved. I have spent a great many years despising you for the crime of resembling your father. You resemble him less by the month. I am not certain whether that is an improvement or merely a different thing to fear. You loved my mother, Harry said, and watched the flat black eyes flinch once the only tell Severus Snape had ever shown him, and felt no urge to press on the wound, which surprised neither of them. Dumbledore never told me. He kept it as he kept everything to spend at the useful moment. But I've learned to read what people are made of, and you're made of one thing, and it's her, and it has been since before I was born. You spent your whole life protecting a woman's son out of love for a woman who chose someone else, and you've done it without thanks and mostly without kindness, and I'm not going to pretend the kindness didn't matter, because it did. You made my school years harder than they needed to be. But I know what you are now, and it isn't what you let the children believe. You're the bravest man in this war, Severus. You've lived inside the enemy's house for years with your own death waiting in every conversation, and you've done it for a promise you made to a dead woman, and no one will ever build you a statue because the price of your usefulness is that no one can ever know. Snape stood very still on the stair. The file trembled once in his hand and went still. He told you, Snape said low. He told me nothing. I read it off you in 30 seconds because I've been down into a founder's dark and come back able to see the shape of a soul, and yours is the saddest and the straightest I've met in this whole rotten country. Harry came down one step so that they were nearer level. I'm not here to torment you with it. I'm here to tell you it's noticed. Whatever happens, whatever the histories say, one person alive knows exactly what you've done and exactly what it cost. And that person is going to be the one who writes the histories, because I'm going to win, and when I do, your name is going in the record as what you are, not as the greasy git in the dungeon. That's not a bribe. You can't be bribed. You're the least corruptible man I've ever met, which is its own kind of prison. It's just the truth delivered by the one person left who can see it. Lily's son sees you, Severus. For whatever that's worth at this hour, I suspect it's worth more than you'll let your face admit. For a long moment Severus Snape said nothing at all, and the tower was silent but for the wind in the stones. And then he inclined his head a single degree, the exact fraction Selwyn had used. The coin the proud pay the powerful when respect has ambushed them past their defenses, and he went up the stair toward the dying man he served and paused once at the turning without looking back. She would have been proud of the part of you that broke the wand, he said to the dark, and afraid of the rest. As am I. Do not prove her fear the truer, Potter. It is the only thing of hers I have left to protect. And he went up and was gone, and Harry stood alone on the cold stair with the second person that afternoon to have laid the same warning on him and added it to the ledger, and did not underline it, because some entries do not need underlining to be read every day for the rest of a life. And Harry Potter, who had come to Hogwarts to break the old man's power and expose his manipulations and turn his people, found that there was nothing left to break, because the old man had broken it himself in a single afternoon more completely than Harry could have, and that the turning of the order would be done by Dumbledore's own hand as a gift, and that the reckoning he had prepared for had become, without his planning it, a reconciliation which was a more useful thing and a more dangerous one. Because reconciliation binds where reckoning only clears, and Harry understood that he had just acquired the most valuable ally of the entire war, and that the ally was dying, and that the two facts together were the truest and most bitter arithmetic he had yet done. They began that afternoon. Dumbledore wrote letters in a hand that shook, and Harry sealed them, and by the week's end the Order of the Phoenix had been told, in the headmaster's own failing script, that the young man they had been taught to guard and to fear was neither ward nor weapon nor dark lord, but the thing the Order had claimed for decades to be building toward and had never once produced, which was a check on power that did not depend on the goodness of the powerful, and that the Order's remaining work was to help him build it. And to be, when the time came, part of the machine that would stop him if he failed. Minerva McGonagall came to Grimmauld Place herself, tartan and grief and a spine like a wand, and she looked at Harry a long time in the drawing-room where the two teacups still stood, and she said, "Albus writes that I am to trust you to be stoppable rather than to be good. I have known you since you were 11 years old and too small for your robes, and I will tell you plainly, I do not know what you have become, and it frightens me." She sat. She poured her own tea, refusing creature an old woman's assertion of the last territory she controlled. "But he also writes that you counseled him to break the Elder Wand, and that you stood beside him while he did it, and that you told him to let the line of the Hallows end rather than take the power that was yours by right. And a young man who talks his own mentor out of handing him the most dangerous wand in the world is not the young man the prophet is describing, and I have taught children long enough to know the difference between a boy who wants power and a boy who is afraid of what he'd do with it." She looked at him over the cup. "So I will trust the machine, Mr. Potter, as Albus asks, and I will be the part of it that tells you no. I have been telling children no for 50 years. You will find me difficult to bribe." "I'm counting on it, Professor," Harry said, and meant it, and Minerva McGonagall heard that he meant it, and something in her tartan spine unbent by a single degree, which from her was a coronation. The 40 families came the following Wednesday in daylight to the House of Black, as a Greengrass girl had advised, and Harry received them in the open, and it was an alliance and not a conspiracy, and the Wisengamot that met the week after was a changed chamber, because a block that had voted its terror for a generation now voted with a purpose, and the purpose was a young man's, and the young man's purpose, when he rose to speak it, was not conquest. It was reform. He proposed, in his first act as a wielder of the neutral bloc, the abolition of the law that permitted imprisonment without trial. under which he himself had nearly been sent to Azkaban at 15, and under which the ministry had held dozens for the crime of being inconvenient. He proposed the seating, on the Wisengamot's advisory councils, of a goblin, a house elf freed and paid, and a werewolf, not as charity but as arithmetic, because a country that ruled a fifth of its people as property or vermin was a country perpetually one grievance from another Voldemort, and the founder's own dark had taught him that a rot untreated does not stay in the beam it starts in. He offered the old order not destruction but a better order, and he offered it coldly on the merits without a single appeal to mercy, because he had learned that mercy pled for is refused and mercy proven profitable is adopted, and he framed every reform as self-interest, which the old families understood, which was the only dialect they had ever been fluent in. The opposition came, as he had known it would, from the bench of the truest believers, the handful of pureblood absolutists who had not yet decamped to Voldemort and clung instead to the doctrine's respectable ministry face. A stout wizard named Mulciber the Elder rose, uncle to the Death Eater, and made the speech Harry had written for him in his own head the night before, almost word for word, because men who have believed one thing their whole lives are the most predictable creatures in any chamber. "A goblin on the councils of the Wisengamot," Mulciber said, and let his voice curdle on it. "A house elf, a werewolf, seated among the heirs of the sacred houses. The heir of Slytherin himself proposes we hand the reins of magical Britain to beasts and servants and half-breeds. I had thought, Mr. Potter, given your recent claims, that you of all people would understand the necessity of hierarchy. The founder you invoke built a school that turned away the unworthy. And now you would seat vermin at his own table." Harry did not rise quickly. He let the word vermin hang in the founder's acoustics until every witch and wizard in the well had heard it echo, until it had become, by its own ugliness, a thing the moderate benches wanted to distance themselves from, and only then did he stand. "You've read the founder's charter, I hope," Harry said, "since it was printed in full for 100,000 readers last month. Then you'll know that the man you're invoking put a working into the deep places of the world that could recognize his true heir, and that the working did not test for blood, and that it passed over 70 years of pure descent in a line of men who called themselves his heirs and starved in a hovel calling it, and it settled on a half-blood raised by muggles because it was never once measuring what you think it measures. You want hierarchy. Fine. So do I. The founder wanted hierarchy too. But he wanted a hierarchy of usefulness, and you want a hierarchy of birth, and the difference between those two things is the entire reason your side has lost every war it has ever started and is losing this one." He turned unhurried to take in the moderate benches, which was where the vote actually lived. "Here is the arithmetic for the members who came to legislate rather than to worship. Gringotts is run by goblins. The goblins hold the gold of every family in this chamber, including the ones on that bench, and they have watched the wizarding world treat them as vermin for 1,000 years. And they have a very long memory and a very precise ledger, and the only reason they have not yet closed their doors and beggared us all is that it has not yet been quite worth their while. Seat one goblin on one council with one real vote, and you have converted 1,000 years of grievance into a stake in the outcome. That is not charity, Mulciber. That is the cheapest insurance premium in the history of this chamber, and you would refuse to pay it because the clerk who offers you the policy has the wrong-shaped hands." A ripple went through the plumb benches, the particular ripple of a chamber recognizing that the clever argument and the profitable argument were, for once, the same argument. "The werewolf," Harry went on, and did not soften because softening was for people who wanted to be liked and he wanted to win. "You have driven by law out of every honest trade so that a man bitten as a child cannot hold a wand permit or a lease or a place. And then you profess astonishment when the werewolves flock to the one man in Britain who offers them anything at all, which is the Dark Lord, who offers them meat and a grievance and a war. Every werewolf in his ranks is a werewolf your laws recruited for him. You did his recruiting. You have spent a century manufacturing his infantry out of frightened bitten children and calling it public safety. Seat one werewolf on this council, repeal the trade bans, and you begin to unmake an army the Dark Lord did not have to raise because you raised it for him. Again, not mercy, arithmetic. I keep saying the word because it is the only one that has ever moved this chamber, and I am not too proud to speak to you in the only language you respect." He let it settle. Then he gave them the line he had built the whole speech to deliver, the one that would travel out of the chamber and into the prophet's grudging columns and the quibbler's eager ones and the talk of 10,000 kitchens. "A country that rules a fifth of its people as property or vermin," Harry said, "is not a strong country. It is a country holding its breath, and it has held its breath through 2 dark risings now and told itself each time that the rot was in the beam and not the house, and each time the rot spread because rot does. I am not proposing that you love the goblin or the elf or the werewolf. I would not insult your intelligence by asking you to feel a thing you do not feel. I am proposing that you stop manufacturing the enemy's army out of the people you have refused a place, and that you do it for the coldest and most selfish of reasons, which is that you would like your grandchildren to inherit a country and not a battlefield. Vote your self-interest. For once, it happens to point the same way as your conscience. I have arranged the whole proposal so that you never have to choose between them. You are welcome." The vote was not close. It was not unanimous, and it was not meant to be, because a reform that passes unanimously has changed nothing anyone feared to lose. But the neutral bloc voted as one, and enough of the moderates followed the arithmetic. and the law that permitted imprisonment without trial died that afternoon in the chamber that had nearly used it on Harry at 15. And a goblin and a freed elf and a werewolf were named to the advisory councils of the Wisengamot for the first time in the thousand-year history of the Founders' Hall. And the Founders' true heir cast the deciding weight of 4 ancient houses, not for a throne, not for conquest, but for the unglamorous, load-bearing, deeply subversive proposition that a world is only as stable as its most excluded person is unresentful. Selwyn watched him do it from the deep green benches and did not oppose him and did not support him, and at the end of the session the silver-haired elder crossed the emptying chamber and stood before the Founder's true heir, and inclined his head the exact fraction he had inclined it in the drawing-room and said, "It is spring, Mr. Potter, near enough." "You are still standing. I said I would come back without the cups." He did not smile. "Consider me come, not because I have grown to like you, because you have made the fair contest I was afraid of and offered my class a place in it we can actually win by being useful, which is more than the Dark Lord offers who would burn us for sport and more than the old ministry offered which would rob us with paperwork. You have given the grey a side to be on that is not a gallows. It is the shrewdest thing I have seen in 50 years in that chamber, and it is going to work, and I would rather be inside it than under it. The 40 families are yours, God help us all." And Arcturus Selwyn, who had never in his long career pledged his house to anyone, pledged it in daylight in the Founder's chamber to a 16-year-old who had declined his tea, and the last great pillar of the old order leaned, with a sound like a country changing its mind, toward the world that a young man was building in place of the one that had tried to spend him. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Reckoning of Serpents. A man who has torn his soul into 7 pieces has made himself, without meaning to, into a map, and Harry Potter had spent the autumn learning to read it. The Founder's book taught him what Voldemort had never understood about his own immortality, which was that the pieces called to one another. A soul wants to be whole. That is the deepest law of it, older than any magic worked upon it, and the pieces of Tom Riddle's soul, scattered across the country in their hidden vessels, strained toward reunion the way filings strain toward a magnet, and a wizard who had learned the Founder's sight could feel that straining, faint and constant, a low music under the world, and could follow it to its sources. Voldemort had scattered his soul to be safe. He had instead hung 7 bells in 7 towers and given the Founder's heir the ear to hear them ring. He gathered the ones he trusted in the drawing-room of Grimmauld Place and told them what he meant to do, because a man building a world outside his own reach does not plan a war alone in the dark, and because every person at the table was a load-bearing wall of the machine he had built to keep himself honest, and he wanted them watching. Hermione had made a map of the soul because Hermione made a map of everything, and it lay on the long table weighted at the corners, the pieces destroyed, the pieces remaining, the vessels and their guardians. 2 left besides the snake and the man, she said, tapping the parchment, refusing to let awe of the subject blur the precision of it. The cup, which every source puts in the Lestrange vault, which is unreachable, and the diadem, which no source places anywhere because it's been lost for 1,000 years. She looked up. "I don't like plans that depend on the unreachable and the lost. The unreachable opened its door to me this morning," Harry said, "because I stopped treating the people who guard it as furniture, and the lost isn't lost to the castle that lost it. Those aren't the hard parts." He set his hand flat on the map. "The hard part is that the moment I take the 4th and 5th pieces, he'll feel it, and he'll understand what's being done to him, and a cornered Voldemort is more dangerous than a confident one, because a confident man protects what he's building and a cornered one only wants to make the world pay. He'll stop raiding villages. He'll go for the throat of something large and visible to change the subject from a newspaper's question back to the old grammar of who holds the wands. And when he does, we don't scatter to defend everywhere. We let him commit, and we bring everything to the one place he commits to, and we end it there in front of witnesses so that the country sees the false heir fall and the true one standing and never has to wonder afterward which was which." McGonagall, who had buried more students than any teacher should, looked at the map and then at Harry. "You are describing letting him strike first. That is a great many lives you are proposing to spend on the timing of a lesson." "I know exactly how many," Harry said, and did not look away from her because looking away would have been a lie and she would have caught it. "I've counted them. It's the worst arithmetic in the whole plan, and I've done it 100 times, and it comes out the same every time, which is that if we chase him and scatter, we lose more over more years and more villages, and the war never ends, it only pauses. One hard dawn bought on purpose against a decade of burning ones. That's the trade. I hate it. I'm making it anyway, and I'm telling you I hate it and making it anyway, because the day I make a trade like this one without hating it is the day you're all supposed to stop me, and I need you to still be at the table on that day, which means I need you at this one." Selwyn, who had come to the drawing-room in daylight and drunk the tea this time, turned his cup a slow quarter and said, "The 40 houses will hold their wands until you call, and come all at once when you do. It is the first time in 400 years the Grey has agreed to strike together instead of survive apart. Do not waste it, Mr. Potter. We are spending our one exception on you." And Daphne, at her father's shoulder, said nothing, and looked at Harry across the map with the frank assessing attention of the girl who had priced him like a horse, and found Harry saw that the price had held. The cup was in Gringotts in the deepest vault of the House of Lestrange, and once that would have been the end of the matter, because no one robbed Gringotts and lived to be robbed again. But the goblins were not the ministry's servants and never had been, and Harry had seated one of their own on the councils of the Wisengamot in daylight. the first wizard in 1,000 years to treat the nation of the goblins as a nation rather than a grievance. And Nagnok had noticed, and the goblins kept a longer ledger than any bank in the world, and on that ledger Harry Potter now stood for the first time in the history of the two peoples in credit. He did not break into the vault. He was invited into it. Nagnok took him down himself in a cart that fell through the dark under London faster than falling, past the dragon and the thundering falls of the thief's downfall, which parted for the founder's heir and the goblin who walked beside him, and into the oldest galleries, where the Lestrange vault stood behind a door that had not been opened by any but its owners in 3 centuries. The goblin laid a long gray hand on the door and spoke to it in the language of iron, and the door remembered that it belonged to the bank before it belonged to any family. And it opened, and inside, among the heaped gold that the cursed multiplying charms had bred into a suffocating hoard, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff sat on a high shelf and sang its thin, sick note of a soul in hiding. The bank does not ordinarily assist a client to remove an object from another client's vault, Nagnok observed, watching Harry lift the cup down through the burning press of the multiplied gold, the founder's magic parting the curse ahead of his hand. The bank makes an exception when the object is a crime against the deepest law there is, and when the client requesting its removal is the only being alive fit to end the crime, and when the family that hid it here has forfeited by treason against the bank's oldest compacts every protection the bank ever extended. Bellatrix Lestrange brought a piece of a torn soul into our vaults and did not tell us what it was. That is a lie told to Gringotts, Mr. Potter. There is no older offense. Take it, unmake it, and when you are king, or whatever word you choose for the thing you are becoming, remember which nation opened its deepest door to you when the wizard's own government would have watched you hang. Harry unmade the cup in the vault, so that no piece of it left Gringotts still holding its passenger. He set it on the cold stone floor amid the Lestrange gold, and he laid his hand on Hufflepuff's badger where it was worked into the metal. And he did to the fragment inside what he had done to the locket and to the thing in himself, made himself so wholly and coldly his own that the fragment's every whisper of temptation was revealed as a lie against the truth of him. And the fragment came apart screaming in the high cold voice and then in the younger voice, and the cup lay quiet, a relic cleansed. And far away Lord Voldemort felt the fourth tearing of the autumn and pressed his hand to his chest in a guttering dark, and did not this time tell himself it was nothing. The diadem was easier and stranger because it was at Hogwarts, in the vast forgotten room that became whatever seeker needed, and the castle was the founder's, and the founder's heir did not have to seek the room at all. He simply asked the castle in the serpent tongue where the lost thing was, and the castle, which had been quietly greeting him with threads of gold along its walls since the day he claimed the founder's chair, answered him, and the diadem of Ravenclaw came down through the school on a current of the founder's magic and into his hands in the empty great hall at midnight, and he unmade it there under the enchanted ceiling that showed a sky of hard bright autumn stars. And the fragment in it fought him with the cold intelligence of the house it had hidden in, and lost, as all of them lost, to a man who had stopped being a place another soul could stay. The castle grieved with him in its fashion which he had not expected and did not know how to answer. As the diadem's fragment came apart, the threads of pale gold that had been greeting him along the walls all season flared bright the length of the great hall, floor to vaulted ceiling, and the enchanted stars overhead wheeled once fast out of their true courses, and every torch in the vast room bent its flame toward the founder's heir at the same instant. And the whole ancient building, which had watched Tom Riddle prowl its corridors as a hungry orphan and later as a smiling prefect hiding a knife, seemed to understand that a thing hidden in its bones for 50 years had at last been drawn out and ended, and it turned its enormous slow attention on the young man in the empty hall, the way a house turns toward the return of the child it had always meant to belong to. Harry stood in the wheeling light with a cleansed relic in his hands and let the castle have its moment, because he had promised to go on feeling everything, and this was worth feeling. The oldest home he had ever known, telling him in the only language 1,000 years of stone possesses that it had been waiting for him too. 5 pieces gone. The diary years ago, the ring by Dumbledore's hand, the locket and the cup and the diadem by Harry's, and the 6th, the piece that had lived in Harry himself, gone into the founder's water on a summer evening. 2 remained, the snake which never left its master, and the master, the last torn scrap of him, walking the world in a body he had built for himself out of terror and old bone. Voldemort understood at last fully what was being done to him, and he did the thing that cornered predators do, which is to stop hiding and to make the whole world pay for the fact that he can no longer hide. He had felt each piece go. That was the cruelty of it, the exquisite engineered cruelty he would have admired in another man. The diary he had lost years ago and mourned as an accident, the ring he had believed the old fool destroyed by chance, and then in the space of a single autumn the locket and the cup and the diadem, one after another, each tearing announcing itself as a cold hollow opening in his chest where something had been, and each one narrowing the space in which Lord Voldemort could continue to exist. He counted the ones remaining the way a drowning man counts the distance to a shore that is not getting closer. The snake himself, too. He had made 7 so that no enemy could ever gather them, and an enemy had gathered 5 in a season. And the enemy was not Dumbledore, whom he understood, whom he had spent a lifetime learning. The enemy was a half-blood boy who spoke to the deep magic in the Founder's own accent and could not be tempted and could not be frightened and could not, it was becoming unbearably clear, be stopped by any of the instruments Lord Voldemort had spent 70 years perfecting. And under the counting in the sealed chamber he did not visit, the small cold voice that had been with him since the orphanage said without triumph, only with the flat certainty of a thing that is always known, he sees you. He has seen you the whole time. He looked into the place you have killed everyone else for looking toward, and he was not afraid, and now he's going to take the last of you apart, and there is nothing you can do because the thing you are afraid of is not death. It is him seeing. And he has already seen. Lord Voldemort could not answer the voice. He had never been able to answer the voice. He had only ever been able to bury it under achievement, under conquest, under bodies, and so he reached, one last time, for the only silence he had ever trusted, which was the silence that falls over a place after enough people in it have died. If he could not be the Founder's heir, he would be the Master of the Wands, as he had been at the beginning, before the newspaper, before the air, before the doubt. He would make the country too frightened to remember the question. It had always worked. It was the first magic he had ever done and the only one he had ever fully believed in. He struck at the Ministry. He did not do it for territory. He did it because the Ministry was the visible body of the old order, the thing everyone could see. And if he could not be the heir of Slytherin in the Founder's chamber, then he would be the master of magical Britain in the only chamber that had ever really run it, the Minister's own, and he would do it in a single night of such violence that the country would forget the newspaper's question in the older and simpler grammar of who holds the wands. He came down on the Ministry of Magic in the black hour before dawn with every Death Eater he had left, and every werewolf his enemies' laws had recruited for him, and every giant and dementor and dark thing that fear could gather, and the wards of the Ministry which had been built to keep out saboteurs and had never imagined an army held for 11 minutes and then broke, and the government of magical Britain which had spent 2 dark risings protecting itself first. Discovered on the last night of its existence that a thing which has spent its whole life protecting itself has forgotten how to be protected by anyone else. The word reached Grimmauld Place at the 10th minute, by goblin courier and a patroness, and Luna standing suddenly upright in the middle of a sentence with her pale eyes fixed on nothing, all three arriving at once. And Harry did the thing he had spent the autumn preparing to do and had prayed in whatever way a man who no longer prayed still prayed that he would not have to. He committed everything. He sent the call down every channel he had built, and the channels answered because he had spent months making himself worth answering. The order roused from a dozen safe houses, the 40 houses lighting their hearths one after another across the country like a constellation coming out, the goblins pouring up out of the deep galleries in their silent wedge, and Harry stepped into a fold of the Founder's magic with Hermione's hand locked on his sleeve and came out of it into the broken atrium of the Ministry of Magic in the 11th minute, into the smoke and the green light and the screaming. And he understood in a single sweep of the Founder's sight that he had arrived too late to save the government and exactly in time to save the people the government had failed. And he chose the people because the government had never once chosen them, and that choice made in the first second of the battle was the whole of the world he intended to build, expressed before he had cast a single working. Rufus Scrimgeour died in the minister's own office at his desk, which was the one dignified thing left to him, refusing to give up the location of the order under a torture that would have broken a younger and softer man. And he died having finally, too late, understood the thing Harry had told him on the marble stair, that a government which will not deserve its people cannot be defended by them, and he died alone in the building he had failed, and it was a hard death and not an unworthy one. And Harry, who arrived too late to save him and in time to see the end of him, added the lion-maned old order to the ledger of the dead the old order had made, and did not forgive the old order for the death and did not fail to honor the man, because Harry came. He came with everything he had built. He came with the order that Dumbledore's dying hand had turned, McGonagall at its head with 50 years of telling children no, burning in her like a war banner. He came with the neutral families, the 40 houses that had spent a generation keeping their children out of both armies and had chosen at last in daylight a third thing to fight for, and Selwyn's people fought that night with the cold ferocity of aristocrats who have decided very late that there is something worth more than survival. He came with the goblins, who had not marched to a wizard's war in 1,000 years and marched to this one, because a nation newly given a stake in the world will spend blood to keep it. He came with Hermione at his shoulder and Luna somewhere in the chaos seeing what others missed, and Daphne Greengrass fighting beside her father with a wand and a face gone past fear into arithmetic. And he came above all with the Founder's magic, and the Founder's magic in a great battle was a terrible and beautiful thing to witness. Where Voldemort's people unmade the ground with fire, Harry remade it. The Ministry's great atrium, its golden fountain long since replaced by Voldemort's earlier propaganda and now a rubble of it, woke under the Founder's tongue. The stone remembered it had been mountains, and the floor rose in slow ramparts to shelter the fleeing clerks and the wounded, walls growing out of the ground faster than curses could bring them down, a fortress assembling itself around the innocent in the middle of a massacre. Where the Dementors came sweeping down the lift shafts to drink the courage out of the defenders, Harry did the thing the Founder's book named the oldest working of all, the taking away of fear. and drove them back not with the memory of a single happy thing but with the Founder's whole vast patience, a cold, clean light with no warmth in it and no terror either, and the Dementors who fed on fear and could not comprehend its absence. Fled from the one man in the world who had gone to the bottom of his own dark and found nothing there left to be afraid of. He was not everywhere, and the machine he had built did the work in the places he was not. That was the point of a machine, and the battle proved it. Hermione held the mouth of the records hall with a discipline that had nothing of the Founder's magic in it, and everything of a mind that had read every defensive charm in the library, and drilled the order in them for 3 weeks straight. She fought as she loved, by refusing to look away, calling corrections down the line in a voice that did not shake even when the masks came in a wall. And behind her the wounded were carried down to the flue by clerks she had organized into stretcher teams before the wards had even broken, because she had planned for the breaking while everyone else prayed against it. Luna moved through the smoke without hurrying, seeing the things others missed. A Death Eater about to round a pillar, a child hidden under a fallen desk, a curse trap laid in a doorway, and she named each of them aloud in her mild, carrying voice at the exact moment it mattered. And people who had laughed at her for 6 years lived that night because they had learned, at last, to listen when Luna Lovegood said, "Look." The goblins fought in a wedge, silent, appalling. A nation's thousand-year patience spent all at once. And the Death Eaters who had grown up on stories of goblins as ledger clerks and gold counters learned in the atrium of the ministry that the stories had been written by the winners of older wars and were lies of the most dangerous kind. Selwyn's 40 houses fought with the cold economy of people who had studied dueling as an art and never expected to need it, and found to their own surprise that they were very good. And Daphne Greengrass fought at her father's shoulder and put a Death Eater down with a severing charm delivered so precisely and so without waste that Harry, catching sight of it across the hall, understood that the girl who had priced him like a horse would have made a formidable general in another life, and might yet in this one. And Minerva McGonagall walked through the middle of the worst of it upright and tartan and unhurried, transfiguring the very statuary of the ministry into a herd of stone guardians that fought at her command. 50 years of telling children no distilled at last into a single night of telling the Dark Lord's army the same word, and no one who saw her that night ever again mistook the stern old teacher for anything less than the war witch she had always quietly been. Even Snape had his moment, which no one but Harry would ever be able to testify to, because Severus Snape fought the whole battle as what he had always been, a thing hidden inside another thing, striking down his own nominal allies from within their ranks with a face still wearing the mask, spending the cover he had kept for years all at once because there was no longer any after to keep it for, and when a curse meant for a fleeing first year came out of the smoke, it was Snape's shield that caught it. Snape's wand, Snape's stolen half-second, and the child lived and never knew who had bought the life, which was the shape of every gift Severus Snape had ever given and the only shape he trusted. It was in the middle of that battle that Albus Dumbledore died, and he died as he had asked to die, on his feet, useful. He had come to the ministry against every counsel, a dying man with a blackened arm and a month he would not live to spend, because he had judged that his last public act should be to stand visibly in the wreck of the old order, at the side of the young man he had tried to sacrifice, so that the country would see the greatest wizard of the age choose the architect over the ministry with his final breath. He fought beautifully at the end, better than he had fought in years, the curse in his arm forgotten in the last work, and he held the eastern stair alone against a tide of masks so that the clerks could reach the flue, and when Dolohov's curse found the gap in an old man's failing guard, Albus Dumbledore fell in the ministry of magic with his wand still raised in his eyes. Harry saw across the smoke, not frightened at all, and the last thing the old man did, in the half-second the Founder's sight let Harry share, was to look for Harry across the battle and, finding him, let go, the way a man lets go of a rope when he has finally been told that someone stronger has taken the weight. Harry did not have time to grieve, and he did the grieving anyway in the only currency the battle would accept, which was to take the eastern stair Dumbledore had died holding and hold it better, and the clerks reached the flue, every one of them, and lived, because an old man had bought them the time and a young man had spent it well, and that was the whole of the eulogy either of them would have wanted. Snape reached the body first. Harry saw it from the head of the eastern stair, a moment stolen out of the middle of a battle. Severus Snape kneeling in the smoke over the fallen headmaster, his black robes pooling in the ruin, and for the space of a breath the mask of the double agent came off the man entirely, and what was under it was grief so old and so private that Harry looked away, because some things are not ours to witness even when we see them. Snape had promised to make the end quick and useful when the curse in the arm finished its climb. The curse had been cheated of its ending by a battle, and the man who had prepared for a merciful murder found himself instead kneeling over a friend killed by an enemy's hand, and Harry understood, watching, that Snape had lost the one death he had been permitted to control, and had been left with the kind that simply happens, which is the cruelest gift the war could have given a man who had spent his life arranging things. Then Snape rose, and the mask came down again, and he turned back into the smoke to spend the last of his cover on the living, because that was the discipline, and grief could wait for an after that might not come, and Harry took the loss and did with it what the battle demanded, which was to convert it at once and without ceremony into the cold, clean fuel of the work still to be done. He would grieve properly later if there was a later. He had learned that from the old man now dead in the smoke, who had bought a room full of clerks their lives with his last breath, and would have been appalled to have it wasted on a pause. The snake found him near dawn, as he had known it would, because the snake went where its master's terror sent it, and its master's terror had at last identified the single source of everything that was being done to him. Nagini came out of the smoke like a length of the dark itself given hunger, faster than a thing that size had any right to move. And Harry met it not with fire, which it expected, and not with a blade which it could dodge, but with the serpent tongue, the Founder's own, and for a moment the great snake checked, because no one had ever spoken to it in the true tongue, only in Voldemort's corrupted hiss, and it heard in Harry's voice the accent of the master its master had only ever imitated. And it hesitated, torn between the man who had made it a Horcrux and the man who spoke like the founder of all serpents. He did not hate the snake. That was the thing that separated the working he did next from the thing Voldemort would have done in his place. Voldemort had taken a living creature and hollowed it into a jar for a piece of his terror, had ridden it and starved it and spent it, and had never once in all the years of it considered that the snake was a creature at all rather than a convenience. Harry considered it. He spoke to it in the true tongue, one last low word that was not a command but something closer to an apology. And the great snake, hearing the Founder's accent in a voice that carried no wish to use it, went still for the half-second Harry needed. And in that stillness he did the necessary thing quickly and cleanly, because the snake was a victim too, a living thing made into a soul vessel against whatever will a snake possesses, and it deserved an ending that was mercy and not spectacle. The Founder's magic closed around the last vessel, and the fragment inside it came apart, and the great snake died as a snake and not as a piece of a monster, and Harry gave it that much because he was not Voldemort, and the difference lived in exactly such moments, the ones no one was watching. 6 pieces gone. 7 counting the one he had carried, every anchor cut. And in the ruins of the Ministry of Magic, in the grey light of the worst dawn the country had known in a century, Lord Voldemort stood mortal for the first time since he was a young man, and did not yet fully know it, and Harry Potter walked out of the smoke to tell him. They faced each other in the broken atrium among the fallen of both sides, and the battle had gone quiet around them the way a storm goes quiet at its exact center, because everyone still living understood that the war had come down to these two, the false heir and the true one, and that nothing they did with their own wands would matter beside it. "You feel it," Harry said, "the cold in your chest where the warmth used to be. That was the last of the pieces, Tom, the snake. It's done. There's nothing hidden now. No cup, no locket, no diadem, no ring, no diary, no snake, no scar, just you, one torn scrap of a frightened man in a body you built out of other people's bones. You spent 70 years making yourself impossible to kill, and I've spent 1 autumn making you mortal, and the terrible part, the part you're going to have just long enough to understand, is that being mortal was never the thing you were actually afraid of. You were afraid of being nobody. Of being the unchosen boy in the orphanage that no one came for. And I can't kill that with a wand, and I'm not going to try, because it was never the wand that was going to end you. It was the truth. And here it is at the end, spoken to your face, which is the one thing you spent your whole life ensuring no one would ever dare to do." Voldemort raised his wand, and it shook, and he saw it shake, and the seeing was worse than the shaking. "The stone never lit for you," Harry said, and stepped closer into the ring of quiet, and his voice was very level and carried no cruelty, which was the most merciless thing it could have carried. "Not because your blood was impure. Not because you weren't clever enough or strong enough or ruthless enough. You were all three more than I'll ever be. It never lit for you because the Founder's magic tests for one thing, and it is the one thing you never had and never could have bought or stolen or killed your way to. It asks whether you know the difference between wanting power to build and wanting it to stop being afraid. You never knew the difference. You built an empire to quiet a frightened child, and you called it greatness, and the magic looked into you and saw the frightened child running the empire, and it turned away, and it has been turning away from you since before I was born, and you knew, and you killed everyone who might have said so, and it did not make the child less afraid for one single day. Enough." The word came out of Voldemort in a voice that had cracked down the middle, the high cold hiss, and under it, breaking through, a London boy's flat vowels that no one had heard in 50 years. "Enough, I am Lord Voldemort, I am your Tom," Harry said gently, and it was the gentleness that finished him, because Bellatrix's devotion could not survive pity, and neither could its master's whole architecture of self. "You're Tom Riddle, and you were a child that no one chose, and that was never your fault, and everything you did about it was. That's the whole of you, that's what's under the Empire. And you're going to die knowing that one person saw all the way to the bottom of you and was not afraid of what he found there, and did not hate you and did not need to, because there was nothing at the bottom worth hating. Only a frightened boy who could have been anything and chose to be this." Voldemort screamed then, and threw the killing curse, the green light he had been throwing since he was 16, the answer he had always given to any question he could not out-argue, and Harry did not dodge it and did not shield against it and did not turn it back. He took its thread as he had taken Bellatrix's on a burning street, and he grounded it, ran the murder down through himself into the deep bones of the world where all the old dark things sleep, and the curse went out of the air and into the earth and was gone, and Lord Voldemort stood in the ruins of his last ambition with his oldest and only answer spent and useless in his hand, and understood in the space of a held breath that there was no curse left in any book for a man who had gone to the bottom of the dark and come back unafraid, and that he was, after everything, after 70 years and countless dead and the tearing of his soul into 7 pieces, exactly what he had been at the beginning. Small, alone, and unchosen, Harry did not curse him. He had thought about this moment for the length of an autumn, and he had decided coldly that he would not be the one to strike the blow, not out of squeamishness, but because a movement built on a single man's mercy is a movement one bad night from a tyranny, and because Tom Riddle at the very end deserved the one thing he had denied everyone else, which was to meet his death as himself and not as a monster's prop. Harry lowered his own wand, and he spoke the Founder's word, and the Founder's magic did the last thing, which was not to kill, but to unmake the working that held Voldemort's ruined soul in its stolen body against the deepest law there was, the law that a torn soul with no anchors left must go where torn souls go. The body of Lord Voldemort did not burn or shatter. It simply failed all at once, the terror that had animated it for 70 years going out of it like a held breath finally released, and Tom Riddle folded to the broken floor of the ministry he had conquered for 11 minutes, and was at last only a body small and old and unremarkable, the least frightening thing in the whole vast ruined hall. Hermione reached him first across the fallen and stopped a pace away and looked at the body of the terror that had shaped both their childhoods and then at Harry, and she did the thing that made her the load-bearing wall she was, which was to check him before she checked the corpse. "You didn't curse him," she said. It was half a question. Her wand hand was scorched and her voice was raw from calling corrections down a line all night. "You had every reason. He killed Dumbledore an hour ago. He killed your parents. You had the whole hall watching and you could have taken the credit for the killing blow and no one would ever have questioned you, and it would have made you a hero in the only grammar most of them understand, and you didn't do it. Why? Because you were watching," Harry said. "In Luna and 40 families and a country that's about to have to decide whether the thing that replaces all this is worth trusting. If the first thing they see me do with real power is execute a disarmed man to warm the crowd, then everything I've said about not being him is a lie, and it's a lie I told with a body at my feet, and the machine we built breaks on its first real test." He looked at the small, unremarkable corpse. "And because he deserved to die as Tom, not as Lord Voldemort, and a curse would have made him a monster to the last, which is the one thing he wanted, a monstrous ending big enough to hide the frightened boy. I didn't give it to him, I let him be small. That's the harshest thing anyone ever did to him, and I did it on purpose, and I'd be lying if I told you there was no cruelty in it at all." He held her scorched, exhausted, unflinching gaze. "You'll tell me if I ever start enjoying that kind, the cold kind, the kind that looks like mercy, you'll tell me." "I'll tell you," Hermione said, and it was not comfort, it was a contract, and it was worth more than comfort, and both of them knew it, and neither of them looked away. And the war was over, and no one cheered, because the survivors were standing among their dead in the grey light in the wreck of the government of magical Britain. And there was no government left, and no minister, and no Wisengamot chamber that had not been half-emptied by the night. And the country woke that morning to find that the terror that had ruled its nightmares for a generation was gone, and that the thing which had ruled its days was gone with it. Both dark risings and the rotten order that had failed to stop them all buried together in one dawn, and the country stood in the smoke of it and understood that the old world was finished, and did not yet know what would replace it, and turned, not knowing it turned, toward the one man left standing in the center of the ruin who had known for a whole autumn exactly what came next. Harry Potter stood in the broken atrium with the Founder's book against his ribs and the ruined locket at his chest, and the dead of both sides at his feet and the survivors of everything watching him in the terrible quiet. And he did not raise his arms, and he did not speak a word of triumph. And he looked at the wreck of the old order that had spent him and lied to him and left him on a doorstep and billed him for his own cage, and he felt the pull he had felt on a headland at the end of us. The flat, clean pull of a man looking at a broken house and reaching at last for the proper tools, and the work that had begun with a question planted in 50 minds came, in the gray and smoking dawn, to the only place it had ever been going, which was the empty center of a fallen world, waiting to be built. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The world remade. There is a particular silence that follows the fall of a government, and it is not peace, and everyone who has lived through one recognizes it, and magical Britain woke into it the morning after the ministry burned. The terror was gone, that was the first fact, and the country turned it over all day like a coin it did not trust, waiting for the trick. Lord Voldemort was dead. His army was scattered or captured or rooted in the cobbles of a dozen crime scenes, and the government that had failed to stop him twice was dead beside him, its minister murdered at his desk, its chamber half-emptied, its offices smoking, its Aurors leaderless. Its long habit of protecting itself first ended in the only way such a habit ever ends, which is badly and all at once. There was no one in charge. For the first time in 3 centuries, magical Britain woke to find the chair at the head of the table simply empty, and the country stood in the doorway of the emptiness and did not know whether to weep with relief or with fear, and mostly did both. Harry Potter did not fill the chair that morning. This surprised everyone, which was the first lesson he intended to teach them. He could have. That was understood quietly by everyone who mattered and a great many who did not. The young man who had gathered a Dark Lord's soul and broken it, who held 4 ancient houses and a founder's chair, who commanded the loyalty of the neutral families in the Order and the goblins, who had walked into a burning ministry and chosen to save the people rather than the state, could have stood up in the wreck of the atrium and declared himself, and no one with the power to gainsay him would have gainsaid him. The country half expected it. Some of the country, exhausted past principle, half wanted it, because a strong hand is a comfort to a frightened people even when the hand is a fist. And Harry Potter, who had spent an autumn learning that the surest way to become a tyrant is to accept a crown offered in a moment of fear, went home to Grimmauld Place instead and slept, and let the emptiness sit because he understood that a settlement seized in the panic of the first morning is a coup, and a settlement built slowly in the weeks after in daylight with the country watching and arguing is a constitution, and he had not spent everything he had spent in order to build a coup. They came to him on the second day to beg him to take it, which he had predicted, because frightened people reach for a strong hand faster than proud people will ever admit. A delegation of the surviving Wisengamot, the ones who had lived through the night, arrived at Grimmauld Place in their singed plum robes with a hastily drafted instrument of emergency powers, and they laid it on the long table beside the 2 old teacups and asked Harry Potter to accept, at once that very hour, sovereign authority over what remained of magical Britain until order could be restored. They were not villains. That was the thing he made himself remember as he looked at their frightened, sincere, exhausted faces. They were ordinary people who had watched their world burn and wanted someone to make the burning stop, and they had correctly identified the only person with the power to do it, and they were offering him everything freely in daylight with no chains attached, and it was the single most dangerous moment of the entire war. No, Harry said, they did not understand. He had known they would not. He poured them tea, creatures, and let them drink it, and explained because a refusal without a reason is only a tantrum, and he had aged out of tantrums. If I take it now like this from a frightened room with no chains and no charter and no argument, then whatever I build afterward will always have been founded in a panic, seized in a night, granted by a handful of terrified survivors who did not have the standing to grant it. And every enemy I ever make will be right to say so, and every child born under it will grow up knowing their world began in a coup. I won't do that to the world, and I won't do it to myself, because a man who accepts unchained power in an emergency has learned that emergencies are the way to get unchained power, and he will find ever after that his country has a remarkable number of emergencies. He set down the pot. Go home, post guards on what's left, bury your dead. And in a month, when the country has caught its breath, we will build the thing properly in the open with everyone at the table, including the ones the old order never seated, and we will chain it before we fill it, and it will be slower and uglier and far more argued over than the clean, strong hand you want tonight, and it will last because the things built in daylight last and the things seized in the dark do not. He looked around the frightened plum-robed table. I am not going to save you from the work of building your own settlement. That is the one thing I will never do for you, because it is the doing of it that will make it yours, and a world that is not yours is a world you will hand to the next dark lord the moment I am inconvenient. You came here to give away your country to the first strong hand that offered. I am refusing the gift. It is the most important thing I will ever do for you, and you will not understand it for years, and that is all right. Home? And they went home bewildered, half insulted, and entirely unable to say afterward that Harry Potter had seized power, because Harry Potter had, in front of a dozen witnesses, refused it when it was placed unchained in his hands. And that refusal, more than any battle, was the founding stone of everything that came after, because a country will forgive a man almost anything if it has watched him decline the crown on the one night he could have taken it for free. He buried Dumbledore first. The country needed to grieve before it could be asked to decide, and he needed the country to see him grieve, not as strategy, though it was also strategy, but because it was true, and the truest things made the best strategy, which was a lesson the old man himself had taught him and had never quite had the courage to use cleanly. The funeral was at Hogwarts by the lake, and half the country came, and the other half watched by every means the wizarding world possessed, and Harry stood at the front not because anyone had placed him there, but because everyone had left the place empty and looked at him until he filled it. He did not give a politician's eulogy. He told the truth, which no one had expected and no one ever forgot. He said that Albus Dumbledore had been the greatest wizard of the age, and had also been a man who spent people for the greater good and had known it and had hated himself for it and had done it anyway, and that both of those things were true, and that the country had to learn to hold two true things at once about its heroes, or it would keep building statues to men, and then being destroyed when the men turned out to be human. He said that Dumbledore had, at the very end, broken the most dangerous wand in the world rather than pass its power on, and had chosen his last act to be the destruction of a temptation instead of the seizing of one, and that this, not the victories, not the titles, was the thing worth carrying forward. He said that the old man had died holding a stair so that clerks could live, and that a life is best measured by the strangers it buys time for, and that by that measure Albus Dumbledore had been rich beyond the counting of any bank. And then he stopped because he had learned that the shortest true eulogy outweighs the longest kind one, and he stepped back and let the white tomb close. And the country watching understood that whatever the young man was, he was not going to lie to them, and a people that has been lied to for a generation will forgive a great deal in exchange for that one thing. Snape stood at the edge of the crowd, apart in his black, and no one spoke to him. And when it was over, Harry crossed the whole grieving multitude to stand beside him for a moment in front of everyone, which was itself a statement, because the country had spent the war believing Severus Snape a villain and would now have to revise the belief on the evidence of the Founder's heir standing at his shoulder in daylight. "You're free," Harry said quietly under the murmur of the crowd. "The double game is over. There's no one left to deceive. You spent your whole adult life inside a mask, and you can take it off now, and I imagine that's more frightening than any battle, because a man who's been a weapon for 20 years doesn't always remember he was ever anything else." He looked at the older man. "I'm building something, Severus. It's going to need people who can't be bribed, and you're the least bribable man I've ever met, and I'd rather have you inside the thing telling me it's poisons than outside it brewing them. There's a place if you want it, not as a servant, as one of the ones who checks me. You spent your life keeping a promise to a dead woman. Come and help me build a world she'd have wanted her son to live in. It's the same promise. It's just kept in daylight now." And Severus Snape looked at Lily Evans's son for a long moment, and whatever passed behind the black eyes was his own, and Harry did not intrude on it. And at last the man inclined his head, the full measure this time, not the fractional coin of respect but the deeper thing, and said, "I will consider it, Potter," which from me is a yes, as you have evidently learned to read. And it was the closest to peace either of them would ever come, and it was enough, and they left it there. The nights of that month were the hardest part, and no one saw them, which was as it should be. The days belonged to the country and the chamber and the charter, and Harry spent them cold and clean and unhurried, the architect at his blueprints. The nights belonged to the dead, and they came for their accounting whether he permitted it or not. Sirius through the veil, Dumbledore on the stair, Scrimgeour at his desk, the lion-maned old Auror who had understood the lesson too late, the clerks and the fighters and the children of the village, the whole ledger of the cost, presenting itself in the dark hours to a young man who had decided long ago not to let feeling steer his hand and had never once decided to stop feeling. He had promised Voldemort that in a ruined chapel. He kept the promise in the dark alone, and it was the most expensive promise he had ever made, and he paid it every night and told no one, because a sovereign who performs his grief in daylight is a sovereign spending it. And Harry Potter had watched Dumbledore spend everything, even sorrow, and had resolved that his own would be the one thing he never put to use. Hermione found him at 3 in the morning in the drawing room more than once, with the charter spread in front of him and the ink dry and his eyes on the 2 teacups that still stood on the table. The drunk one and the full one, Selwyn's old reminder, and she did not ask him if he was all right, because she was too honest to ask a question whose answer she already knew, and she sat instead and worked beside him, and this was the whole of what she offered, and it was enough. And it was the truest thing anyone gave him in that terrible month, the simple refusal to let him build the new world entirely alone in the dark. "You could stop, you know," she said once near dawn, not looking up from the clause she was checking. "Take the crown they're offering, skip the chains, rule well because you would rule well, and spare yourself all this machinery of self-distrust. Half the country would kneel tomorrow and the other half would be too tired to object. You've earned it. Nobody would stop you." She was not tempting him, she was testing the wall as she always did, tapping it for the hollow places. "Tell me why you won't one more time so I can hear whether the reason has changed, because the day the reason changes is the day I do the job you gave me." "The reason hasn't changed," Harry said. "I won't take the crown without the chains, because the crown without the chains is the thing that killed everyone we buried this month in every version of it. Voldemort's blood crown, Dumbledore's greater good crown. Grindelwald's, they were all the same crown, worn by men who were sure they'd wear it well, and every one of them meant it, and every one of them was right up until the morning they weren't. And there's no alarm that rings on that morning, you told me that yourself, there's no door, only a slope. So I'm not going to trust myself to feel the morning coming. I'm going to build the alarm out of you and Luna and McGonagall and a goblin and an elf and a werewolf and a mad newspaper, and I'm going to wire it into the founding magic where I can't reach the switch. That's the reason. It hasn't moved an inch since the headland, it won't. And the day it does, Hermione, you'll be the first to know, because I'll have started very reasonably to explain to you why just this once the chains should come off." He looked at her. "That sentence. If you ever hear me start that sentence, that's the morning. Don't wait for the rest of it." "I won't wait," Hermione said, and went back to the claws, and the two of them worked until the light came up gray over the square, and it was not romance, and it was better than romance. It was the thing romance is supposed to become and mostly fails to, which is two people building a difficult thing side by side and trusting each other to hold the parts they cannot hold themselves. Daphne Greengrass came to the founding on the last day and stood with her father among the 40 houses, and afterward in the emptying chamber she crossed to where Harry sat in the founder's chair and looked up at him a long moment with the frank assessing attention he had first met in a tea room a lifetime ago. "I priced you wrong the first time," she said. "I had you at a clever boy who would either die or become the Dark Lord, and I hedged accordingly, and my father thought me too generous even then." She tilted her head. "I don't know what to price you at now. A king who builds his own gallows into his throne. There's no line for that in any leisure my family keeps. It's either the shrewdest thing I've ever seen or a kind of madness that happens to look like wisdom from underneath." A pause. "My father says the two are frequently the same investment and that the trick is to be inside it rather than under it. So, the House of Greengrass is inside it, Mr. Potter. And I find, to my own considerable annoyance, that I intend to stay close enough to keep pricing you indefinitely, because it is the single most interesting thing I have ever found to do, and because someone ought to, and because I have decided it might as well be me. And she inclined her head and turned to go and paused and said without turning back, "Do not make me revise the price downward. I should take it personally." And she left, and Harry watched her go and did not smile and felt the thing he did not name and let it stand unpriced in the ledger, because some entries a man keeps for himself. The settlement took a month to build, and Harry built it in the open on purpose so that no one could ever say it had been done to them in the dark. He convened it in the founder's chamber, the Wisengamot Well, because the room itself was an argument, quarried from the founder's holding, older than the government that had just died, built by the four who had built the school before there was a ministry to corrupt. He convened not only the surviving members of the Wisengamot, but the ones the old order had never seated. The goblin nation sent Nagnok, who had opened the deepest door to the founder's heir when the wizards would have hanged him. The freed and paid house elves sent a representative, which had never happened in the history of the world and made half the chamber flinch and the other half, watching, understand that something had genuinely changed. The werewolves sent a woman whose trade the old laws had destroyed. The neutral families sent Selwyn, the order sent McGonagall. And Harry sat for the whole first week, not in the founder's chair, which still stood revealed and empty at the height of the chamber, but in his 3 house seats among the 50, and let them argue, and said very little, because a settlement a man argues his subjects into is a settlement they will spend a generation resenting, and a settlement they argue themselves into is one they will defend as their own. They argued about everything, which was the point. They argued about whether the ministry should be rebuilt or replaced, and Harry let them arrive over days at the conclusion he had reached in an afternoon, which was that a thing which had failed twice should be replaced and not merely repainted. They argued about the blood laws, the whole rotten architecture of the pure-blood settlement, the marriage registries and the wand permits and the creature classifications, and here Harry did intervene once coldly when a surviving traditionalist rose to propose that the old categories be preserved for stability. And Harry stood and said the one thing he had been waiting a month to say in that chamber in front of the country on the record. "We are not preserving the blood categories for stability," he said, "because they have never once produced stability. They produced Grindelwald and they produced Voldemort and they produced 2 generations of frightened families raising their children as hostages, and a thing that produces a Dark Lord every 40 years is not a source of stability, it is a factory for Dark Lords, and we are closing the factory." He let it land in the founder's acoustics. I want to be precise about why, because the reason matters more than the ruling. The founder whose chair stands empty above this chamber, whose name every purist in the country has carved on his banners, whose legacy they have murdered in the name of for a century, did not hold the doctrine they killed for. I have been down into his own reliquary. I have read his own mind in his own hand. The blood purity creed is a 1,000-year misreading of a frightened man's caution, pickled by his descendants into a religion of hatred, and the founder himself would have burned their pamphlets to warm his hands. So understand what we are doing today. We are not betraying Salazar Slytherin's legacy by ending the blood laws. We are ending the theft of it. The purists were never the founder's heirs. They were squatters in a great name they never understood, and the last of them died in the ruins of the ministry a month ago. And today his creed dies with him in this chamber by the vote of the free, and it is not coming back, because I am the founder's true heir, and I am telling you with his own authority that it was never his and never yours and never anything but a lie that a great many people found convenient to believe. The chamber was silent. And then the goblin Nagnok, who had waited 1,000 years for a wizard to say such a thing in such a room, rose from the seat no goblin had ever held, and inclined his head to the founder's heir and sat, and the gesture went around the world by nightfall, and the blood laws of magical Britain, which had stood for 300 years, were struck down that afternoon by a coalition that included, for the first time in history, the people they had been written to cage. They argued about the prisoners, and this was where the country most wanted its new sovereign to be a tyrant and where he most refused. The cells held what remained of Voldemort's people, the rooted raiders and the captured masks, Bellatrix among them, taken at last in the ruin of the ministry, and the chamber's temper ran hot for the gallows, and there were survivors in the galleries who had earned the right to want it, and Harry let them speak, and then he did not give them what they asked. "We will try them," he said, "everyone, in the open with defense counsel on evidence before the seated councils under the very law we just wrote that forbids imprisonment without trial, because if the first thing we do with the new law is suspend it for the people we hate, then it is not a law, it is a mood, and a mood is what the old ministry ruled by, and I did not spend a war to replace one mood with another." He did not raise his voice. "I know what Bellatrix Lestrange did. I stood in the room. I want her to face it in daylight, named and evidenced and answered for, and to go to a cell built by law and not by my temper, because a Bellatrix hanged by a sovereign's fiat is a martyr and a lesson in nothing, and a Bellatrix tried and convicted and caged by the free is the end of everything she believed in, which is that power is only ever the strong doing as they will to the weak. She spent her life proving that thesis. I intend to spend the rest of hers disproving it publicly with a trial which will hurt her worse than any rope, because it will be fair, and fairness is the one thing her whole world was built to deny was possible." And the gallows temper of the chamber cooled, not because it was satisfied, but because it had been shown something colder and more durable than satisfaction, which was a sovereign who would not be bent even by a grief he shared. And there was a holdout. There is always a holdout, and Harry had counted on it, because a settlement with no one left to refuse it is a settlement no one truly chose. An old wizard of one of the last absolutist houses rose on the final day, a man named Roll who had lost two sons to Voldemort's cause and had learned nothing from the losing. And he refused the whole of it, the freed peoples and the broken laws and the bound sovereign alike. And he said he would not live in a world where an elf sat above him and a half-blood held the founder's chair. And he demanded, trembling, to know what the new sovereign would do with a man who simply would not consent. The chamber went still because this was the test, the real one, the moment the whole month had been quietly walking toward, what the architect did with the one who refused to be built into the building. Nothing, Harry said. The old man blinked. You've broken no law, Harry said. Refusing to like the world isn't a crime, and I'm not going to make it one, because the day I start jailing men for their opinions is the day I've become the thing my whole charter is built to prevent. And you, Roll of all people, do not get to be the excuse for it. You may keep your opinion. You may keep your seat and your vote and your voice and use all three against everything I build, for as long as you live and the free press will print you and the councils will hear you and no one will touch a hair of you, because a settlement that cannot survive one bitter old man's disagreement is not a settlement, it is a spell, and spells break. What you may not do is make anyone else a hostage to your refusal, and you no longer can, because the laws that let your class do that died this afternoon. So go home, Lord Roll, be as unreconciled as you like. You are living proof, walking free and unpunished and loudly aggrieved, that the thing I built is not the tyranny you say it is, and I find I would rather have you at liberty as my counterargument than in a cell as your own. And the old man had no answer to that, because there is no answer to being handed exactly the freedom you accused your enemy of intending to take. And he sat unreconciled and lived out his years unreconciled, and became exactly as Harry had said, the most useful man in the country, the standing disproof of every accusation of tyranny, protected in his dissent by the very sovereign he despised. But the hardest argument, the one Harry had known would be the hardest, was about him. Because a country that has just watched a young man gather a dark lord's soul and break a government and refuse a crown does not relax. It does the opposite. It looks at the empty chair and the young man who could fill it, and it becomes correctly afraid, and the wisest among them said so out loud in the chamber, and Harry made certain they were given the floor, because a settlement that silences its own critics is a tyranny wearing a settlement's clothes. It was McGonagall who said it plainest, because she had earned the right and because she had promised the dying Dumbledore to be the part of the machine that said no. You have refused the crown, she said, standing, tartan and iron, and I have watched you refuse it, and I believe the refusal is sincere, and none of that changes the arithmetic that frightens me, which is this. You hold 4 houses and a founder's chair and a power older than this chamber, and you have destroyed every rival you had, Voldemort and the Ministry and gently Albus himself, and you now stand alone at the center of a broken country with no one able to stop you but the people you have personally chosen to be your checks. And forgive me, Mr. Potter, but a check the check man selects is a check the check man can unselect. You say Miss Granger will tell you no, I believe she will. I also believe that on the day she becomes truly inconvenient, you will have the power to remove her, and the only thing preventing it will be your own character, and you have taught this chamber eloquently over the course of a month that we must never again build a world that depends on the character of one powerful man. So I put your own lesson to you. What stops you, not your virtue? You have told us not to trust it. What in the structure stops you? It was the question the whole month had been building toward, and Harry had known it would come, and he had built his answer not out of words but out of law, because words were what tyrants offered and law was what they feared. You're right, he said. About all of it, a check I can unselect isn't a check, so I'm not going to ask you to trust that I won't remove Hermione or Luna or you. I'm going to make it impossible. He rose and he laid on the great table of the chamber a document, and it was not a proclamation of power. It was a surrender of it, drafted with Nagnok over 3 weeks, witnessed by the bank, binding under the oldest magic the goblins kept. This is a charter. It creates the office I'll hold, and I'll tell you plainly it's a sovereign office, because I'm not going to insult you by pretending the power I have can be dissolved by a committee. It can't. And a settlement built on the pretense that it can would collapse the first time reality tested it. So the office is real, and it's mine, and it's for life. And it is bound in the same document by chains I am fixing to it now in front of you that I cannot afterward remove, because the binding is written into the magic of the office itself, so that the day I try to break a chain, the office breaks with it and I become, that instant, a private man with a private wand and no more authority than my arguments can earn. He let them read it. He gave them a week to read it, and the goblins to verify it, and the country to argue it, because a chain accepted in haste is not accepted at all. The chains were these, and he named them aloud so that they would live in the record and in the memory of the country and could never be quietly filed away. The office could be ended, and its holder stripped by a vote of the seated councils, including the goblin and the elf and the werewolf, and the holder had no power to dissolve those councils or alter their number, so that the ones with the power to end him were precisely the ones the old order had ruled as property, and could never again be made property without the whole structure failing. The office could not touch the free press, and the Quibbler's Charter of Independence was written into the founding document in Luna Lovegood's own hand, so that the one thing every tyrant reaches for first, the throat of the people who describe him, was placed permanently beyond the sovereign's reach. The office was required to answer on the record any question the councils put to it, so that the darkness in which the old ministry had done its worst was drained out of the new office by design. And the office ended with its first holder. There would be no dynasty, no heir, no passing of the thing to a son or a chosen successor. The sovereignty Harry Potter was building for himself would die with Harry Potter, and the country would then have to build its own, having had a generation to learn how, because the last lesson of the Elder Wand was that the most dangerous power is the kind that gets inherited by someone who did not earn the wisdom to hold it. That's the answer, Professor, Harry said, when the week was done and the chamber had read and the goblins had verified and the country had argued itself hoarse. Not my virtue, a machine built outside my reach that makes tyranny cost me the very power I'd be trying to abuse. I can't remove Hermione because the councils I can't dissolve would remove me for trying. I can't silence Luna because the press is chained to the founding and the founding is chained to the office and the office is chained to me. I built a crown that strangles the head that tries to misuse it. It's the ugliest, most paranoid, least trusting instrument of government ever proposed in this chamber, and I designed every line of it on the assumption that its first holder, meaning me, will eventually be tempted to become a monster, because I've read enough history to know that everyone is, and I'd rather bind myself now, while I'm still the man who wants to be bound, than trust the man I might become to bind himself later, when he won't want to. He looked at McGonagall and then at the whole chamber and then at last up at the founder's chair. You asked what stops me. The honest answer is you do, all of you. I've spent a month handing you the tools on the record in daylight, and I'm about to make them permanent, and after today, if I ever become the thing you're right to fear, you'll have everything you need to end me, and I'll have signed it myself, and that is the only kind of promise worth a damn, the kind the promiser can't take back. And Minerva McGonagall looked at the charter and looked at the young man she had taught as a child too small for his robes, and she did the thing that cost her the most, which was to be convinced, and she inclined her head and she said, "Then I will hold the tool you have given me, Mr. Potter, and I will use it the day it is needed, and I pray to whatever is left to pray to that the day never comes." And she sat, and the last great skeptic in the chamber had been answered not with a speech but with a signature, and the settlement was in that moment made. They ratified it on the last day of the month in the founder's chamber, and it was not a coronation, because Harry had forbidden the word in the pageantry, and it was something stranger and colder and more durable, which was a country binding a sovereign and a sovereign binding himself in the same document at the same hour, each protecting the other from the thing they both knew a man with too much power becomes. And then, only then, with the chains fixed and the charter sworn and the councils seated and the blood laws dead and the free press guaranteed and every safeguard he could imagine written into the founding magic of the office, Harry Potter climbed for the first time the height of the chamber to the founder's chair that had stood empty for 1,000 years, and he sat in it, and the stone of the whole vast room quarried from the founder's own holding. Woken ran gold from floor to dome in a single vast exhalation of ancient magic acknowledging that the founder's true heir had at last taken the seat the founder built and left. And the light of it fell on the seated councils and the freed peoples and the bound charter and the broken blood laws, on a world remade not in the image of a conqueror, but in the image of a man who had gone down into the dark and come back determined that no child would ever again be spent by the certain, and it was done. The magic did not stop at the chamber's walls. Harry felt it go out from the founder's chair through the stone, down into the deep places, along the veins of gold he had first woken on a drowning causeway at the end of a summer, and everywhere the founder's work had slept for 1,000 years it stirred and turned toward him at once. The reliquary on its island under the western sea, the castle on its hill greeting him along every corridor, the very bones of the country where the old rock remembered it had once been living mountains, all of it acknowledging in a single vast and silent exhalation that only he could hear, that the founder's heir had taken the founder's seat. And that the legacy which had been stolen and corrupted and murdered in the name of for 100 years had come home at last to a man who had gone down into its dark, and asked it not for a throne, but for the tools to build a fairer thing. The gold light stood in the great well of the chamber for the length of a held breath, floor to dome, and in it the seated councils and the freed peoples and the bound charter and the struck-down laws were all lit the same color, the goblin and the elf and the werewolf and the sovereign and the unreconciled old lord alike, no rank in the light, no purity in it, no hierarchy of blood. Only the founder's ancient magic falling without preference on everyone the old world had sorted and catalogued and caged. And then it faded slowly into the ordinary daylight of an ordinary chamber on an ordinary afternoon, and the world was remade, and the old order, which had spent him and lied to him and left him on a doorstep and built him for his own cage, yielded at last not to a tyrant's fist, but to an architect's blueprint, drawn in daylight, chained in law, and sealed in the oldest magic there was. He held the country for the rest of his life, and he held it well, and he held it gray. And the histories would argue for centuries about whether the thing he built was the wisest settlement the wizarding world ever made or the most subtle tyranny it ever submitted to. And Harry Potter, who understood better than any of them that the honest answer was both and that the argument itself was the safeguard working exactly as designed, never once tried to settle the question. Because a sovereign who lets the country argue forever about whether he is a tyrant is a sovereign, the country will never quite stop watching, and being watched, he had decided on a headland at the end of a summer, was the only chain strong enough to hold a man who could speak to the deep magic in the Founder's own tongue. There is a portrait of Albus Dumbledore that hangs now in the Founder's chamber, added by Harry's own order, and it watches the sovereign work, and the two of them talk sometimes late, when the chamber has emptied, the dead old manipulator and the living young one, and they do not always agree, and the portrait says more than once that it cannot yet tell whether Harry has built the machine that finally frees the wizarding world or the most beautiful cage ever devised, and Harry, signing the day's answers to the council's questions, cold and clean and unhurried, tells the old man that he cannot tell either, and that the not telling is the point, and that a man who is certain would already have become the thing they both feared, and the portrait at that goes quiet, and something in the painted face settles, the way a face settles when it has finally, 40 years too late, been given the answer to the question that killed its sister. And Harry Potter turns back to the work in the Founder's chair in the gold light, in the world he built out of the wreck of the one that tried to spend him, and does not look up because the work is not finished and will not be finished in his lifetime, and he has made his peace with that, having learned in a Founder's dark that the only worlds worth building are the ones you will not live to see completed. Chapter 7 End.